Okay.
Okay, yeah, my name is Andy Smith. I'll be, chair until, Erica gets here. She should be coming in a little bit later. Welcome to the August 15th meeting of the City of Charleston Design Review Board. The members of the board present are Eunice Leolia, Lucas Boyd, Stephanie Corson, Aaron Stevens should be here shortly, and Eric Chase will arrive a little bit later. Members of staff, city staff present are David Meeks, the Design Review Board Administrator, Eric Coleman, that's actually project manager, and Patrick Carlson, city clerk. No board members are recused from this evening's agenda. No agenda items have been deferred. The order of the meeting will be following: introduction of the project context reviewed by staff, presentation by the applicant. We generally limit that to 10 minutes, but if you need a little bit more time, let us know when you begin. We'll arrange for that. All presenters, please state your name for the record and your affiliation with the project. More questions, public comments, generally limit that to 10 minutes also. Please clearly state your name for the record. Public comment. This is city staff recommendations, applicant response or clarification, the public comments, city staff comments. Board discussion. We ask that the applicant please remain quiet during the board discussion unless addressed. And I recognize the chair. Board motion was second. Any further discussions? Please turn off any mobile phones or devices that make noise at this time. Comments from the public are limited to site design and architecture of buildings and site only. The board does not have any authority over zoning issues such as land use, building density, flooding, or traffic. With that, we will begin with our first item this evening, which is 1731 Savannah Highway. Request approval for demolition of a two-story house turned commercial over 50 years of age. David?
Thank you, Andy. Just a little bit of context on the screen. You can see the red arrow thumbtack where the site is located. It's a building built in the 1950s. Here's a closer view of the location. There used to be another house right next to it that was also stone that was torn down, I think about 15 years ago. Closer view. And looking into the site, you can see the stone building in the middle. And then a closer view. And with that, I'll turn it over to the applicant.
Good evening. My name is Steve Ramos. I'm an architect here in Charleston. I'm representing on behalf of the owner of the property. This is an old house. It's been here at least since the 50s because those are some of the oldest records. It's a house like many properties in this area. It's commercial, so it's a commercial zone property. So over the years, it's been used for a variety of commercial uses. Because of its size and orientation or the layout, it's no longer really ideal for a commercial business. And that was really the genesis for why the owner would no longer like to use the building. Whenever an owner decides that they don't want to use a building in Charleston, and if it's older than 50 years in this case, it requires review by this board to determine whether or not it should be safe. And when we preserve buildings here, we preserve them forever. And so the question of whether or not this building should be safe is really important and should not be taken lightly. Go to the next slide.
Yes, please.
Next. And I'm going to show you some photos of it just to get you acclimated to the building, and then I'll talk a little bit more and kind of dissect the building itself. There you can see the aerial photograph. Next.
Oops, sorry.
Okay. Just from another view, it has had several additions over the time, so more than half the building was added on. Next. This is a diagram that just helps illustrate how much of the building we believe is original, which is the front house. There are 2 side additions that were added. There was a rear dormer on the 2nd floor. And then there was a large garage addition that was clearly added after the fact. Next. And so there's a photo in the top left from the 50s that does show the main footprint of the house. So we know it dates back to East Tower. I was able to find in one of the city directories from the 50s, Louis P. Gaffney, that was the resident at that time. Next. And here are photos of all 4 sides of the building. So the photo on the top left, I mean, that what you see there, that is the main form of the original house. One of the things that's really unusual is it's got a stone facade to it, which, well, we don't have those in Charleston because that's not a material that people would have used. Generally, vernacular architecture is made from materials that are local. And this stone in Charleston is not the case. The image top right, you can see the large rear addition that was added. Also, that gable that's right on the top right, that was added as well. And then the dormer is most evident in the bottom right-hand image. That kind of dormer that pops up with the black stuff there. Next. These are just some other views. The building is not in great condition. There is clear evidence of envelope issues with both the roof and the walls. Not surprising, but the stone veneer in particular is particularly challenging to waterproof. It is a veneer. We have images that show that. The only way to really properly waterproof would be to remove that veneer. Next. When I look at building as an architect, I don't just look at the building, I look at the context of which it resides. Knowing that this is a house, it certainly doesn't look like buildings on Savannah Highway. And so I looked at the neighborhood behind it. It doesn't really look like the houses that are in the neighborhood behind it. I thought maybe I would find other stone houses, and then maybe this was a collection of stone houses. But from what I can see today, that's not the case. Next. Just some views of Savannah Highway right at this site. Next. These are images inside the house. And again, it is a house, so it still has a central staircase. I've mentioned that it's not ideal for commercial business anymore. The ceilings are low, it's chopped up. And that on top of the many maintenance issues are the real reason why the owner has decided it's time to move on. Next slide. So the stone I mentioned is the interesting thing about this building. We don't have stone buildings. The detailing of it is poor. It is a veneer. It's not a full depth stone. You can see images on the top right where there are holes in the historic wall where you can see through to the sheathing. There is building fill. But one of the things that's unusual, if you look at the bottom 3 images, inside of the attic space in one of the additions, there is brick veneer. That's confusing because it's stone on the outside, there's brick veneer. There's also brick in the crawl space. And it seems odd that the brick would have been added after the fact. The sequencing sounds more realistic that the brick was there first, the stone came afterwards. It's hard to tell. It's kind of a confusing building, but even the brick itself is a brick veneer that you can see. Next. These are just images into the attic on the top. This is conventional 2x wood stud construction, so this is not heavy timber or things you would see in older houses in Charleston. And you can see just some views into the crawl space. Again, there's brick veneer and crawl space, brick piers, and 2x framing of the ground floor. Next. So I mentioned there are a lot of issues just with the facade of the building. There's various instances of wood rot at eaves, mosaic detailing, as well as the wood at the windows that needs full replacement. There's evidence of settlement at the ground floor. And it's like a lot of old buildings that settle, especially when they don't have a proper foundation. And this one, it's got some issues. Next. There's a lot of words on this page that I cannot read from this far, but if you guys have them, at your disposal, this is just a summary of our reasoning behind this building not being worth saving. We once identified as obsolete and needing a significant amount of repairs, we say, well, is this worth saving? It is a building that is really not of Charleston. Just to say that it relates to the context would be a real stretch. We're not aware of any cultural significance that would deem this building worth saving. And that's why we're here today to ask permission for full demolition. The rest of the set has a very in-depth structural report put together by the Bastion Group. It really talks about the envelope as well as the structure in itself. To make this a brief presentation, I'm not going to go through every page of that, but it is very in-depth and certainly worth going into. But we haven't found anything that suggests that this building is worth preserving. And for those reasons, when we ask permission to make the demolition, happy to answer any questions.
More questions?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Here. To the applicant, as the board, we have received some thoughtful letters from the Preservation Society of Charleston and others with regards to protecting and saving this building. Have you or your client interacted with them? And if so, could you not come up with some sort of resolution?
Sure, I mean that.
And
Yes, so yes, absolutely. So we always meet with Preservation Society and the Historic Charleston Foundation prior to the great conversation with them about that. They also recommended that we speak with Ms. Donna Jacobs, who is here tonight, and she is a historian of West Ashley. So she provided a lot of helpful information on the history of the building. That being said, none of it seemed of significance to save this building. It has history, like all buildings. This area was developed by the group that developed Stone Oak Park. But we don't have any evidence that those folks lived in the building. They bought the property, subdivided it, and sold off parcels. That's how real estate, goes. And so, to me, that doesn't mean that this building should be preserved.
so, because it sounds like you guys could not come to some sort of agreement, if for some reason, if this board decided to go with the application, I'm not saying that we are sure have a lot of discussion that needs to take place. But would you guys be willing to somehow create some sort of identification that that's was the Halter house?
No, that's
That's
the
the other
next
house,
one.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah, this is the one that the long history of the brothers and the wife and the Bill, North Charleston or North Carolina. Would there be any way to be able to recognize, preserve the marker to maybe somehow memorialize some of this history? Because there was some really good reading with regard to the Harrison, I guess the Randolph. It took me a while to figure out who's the brother and who was the half brother and and all of that. But is there was there any discussion in regards to that?
Yes, and Ms. Jacobs was kind enough to on call. We talked about the history, and it was confusing. That's not a criticism. It's just
Right.
sometimes it's hard to go through this. So And I also don't want to make light of the history. You know, I'm looking for things that are significant. And also I don't have those letters. They weren't online, so I only have the discussions with Historic Charleston Preservation Society, Ms. Jacob. So I can't speak specifically to those letters. But acknowledging the history of the site through a marker, and I think absolutely that would be a win-win. That's a great idea. But preserving the building, that's again why we're here tonight. But I'd be happy to address the comments once I hear them, because I haven't read those letters.
And if I might, just one other question. In your presentation, it was very helpful when you laid out the diagram that had the different sections of the house.
Yeah.
Is there any discussion or consideration to just preserve the original portion and not the remaining other sections? Is that something your client?
We talked about that. It's just a very small little house, and so trying to think of a viable solution. It's a tough one for how to use it. But that again, that's our ask is a full demolition. I think demolishing the bad garage in the back, that's an easy one. That's very poor construction. But salvaging the small house, again, just my opinion, I don't see the significance of it. And I consider myself an urban designer, and I look at context and how buildings in a group create place. And I don't see that here. And I don't see that keeping that would contribute to some sense of place or betterment.
Thank you.
Yeah, as we move into public comment, we did receive for this application 3 letters. One from Aaron Milligan, Preservation Society, one from Donna Jacobs, and one from Paul Swift, all in opposition of the. So with that said, I'll open the floor. Do we have?
Hello, Eric Coleman, West Ashley Coordinator for the City of Charleston. Whenever I show up, I'm going to be talking about Plan West Ashley with you guys. Some of what Plan West Ashley says in terms of the vision for West Ashley is preserving the unique character of the areas. In addition to that, looking forward past that wants to see the areas be thriving and vibrant. So that's where we kind of come with these issues with demolition along our main corridors. Much to Mr. Ramos's point, yes, this area actually has been problematic as a commercial area. For example, the car dealership next door in 2003 was actually a 2-story stone structure that looked very similar to this one. They came in and requested a use variance to become a small used car dealership. That is how we now have that use next door. There were actually 2 stone buildings in this location up until 2003. In addition to that, up until about 2001, there were 4 of these homes in a row, not all stone, but they were all 4 residential homes. So over time, the character of the area has been whittled away. So that is where Plan West Ashley would actually recommend keeping this, because it is part of the unique character, especially in this area, the unique character of West Ashley, that we were a 1950s development with homes that came up to the highway. So it would be viewed the same that you would see it in the Savannah Highway overlay further down in Burnstown and Avondale, where the homes came right up to the edge. The difference is over the years, before the DRB had purview over historic demolition, people came in and would scoop out these smaller homes and flip them over to larger commercial units. So that's kind of just, I wanted to give the background from Plan West Ashley.
Donna, do you want to see peeking at me?
Even though I submitted my letter, I'd still like to put it on the record because I think it's really important here. My name is Donna Jacobs and I live in Burlington. We've seen you here a lot. And I've learned so much about this process during my time in the scene. I've also learned a bit about your language and how it relates to design, architecture, and visual line of space. The words rhythm, vernacular, mass scale, conversation, physical play, they mean something to me. These terms are your language, and I hear them when you design. And I've been reflecting on them in relation to a seminar I once attended that illustrated how architecture should tell stories. I say this all to address the demolition request at 1731 Savannah. This stone house at 1731 Savannah Highway not only speaks to rhythm, mass, and scale, but its architecture tells a story in a very unique vernacular that we should honor and keep in the conversation, not only about this commercial corridor, but all of what's actually. The story allows us to keep our sense of place. I've shared with you the longer version of the story that was published in West Ashley. It is confusing, it took me a long time to sort it out, and ask for your consideration, just quickly share with you the important. Randolph Harrison followed his older brother, Joe Harrison, to the country. Joe Harrison owned property that became Burns Downs, Moreland, Westwood. They became very successful farmers. Randolph farmed the land where this house sits. Randolph married Wilhelmina Pinckney, had a family, and as many successful people over time, they summered in the mountains of North Carolina. Randolph passed away at a young age, and Wilhelmina must have continued this tradition, for her son, Randolph Jr., met his wife, Opal, in North Carolina. Opal's parents must have fallen for the lure of the low country because Pearl and Ott moved with their 9 children to San Diego. Ott had construction skills, and he could buy some new methods of plastering. Wilhelmina had land that was now more profitable for growing homes and cabbage. A relationship was formed, and the subdivision of Stone Oak Park was crowded in 1949. Ott built 2 homes in Stone Oak Park with funded Savannah Highway. He imported the stone from the Hendersonville area and created a showcase for all those who drive by. I have had pictures, or I've seen pictures of other stone houses in the area. I can't find them, unfortunately, to share with y'all tonight, but there are more than just these 2. Unfortunately, his home has already succumbed to a wrecking ball before we can learn the story and protect its importance. In addition, one must remember that Savannah Highway was the main connection from north to Florida, even when it was framed on both sides with fields of crops and actively used for truck farming. When the suburban transition happened, the neighborhoods were plattered right to the highway. Windermere, Moreland, Burnstown, Carolina Terrace, St. Andrews Heights, St. Andrews Terrace, which are across the street from Stone Oak Park, and Stone Oak Park, to name a few of them. The commercialization of the highway was mainly in the form of gas stations, guest homes, tourist cabins, motorsports, hotels, small clubs and restaurants, low-profile tourism-related businesses. We lost this residential character in some areas, mainly when the highway was widened. I challenge this applicant to make a creative use of this unique and important stone building that was once a home. However, I do fear there is no future structure planned at this time, and the demolition will pave the way for parking more cars along this major historic corridor of West Ashley, where every mile there is another story just like the one. Please deny this demolition request so we can always point to this place. And remember, our story is reflected by its unique architecture. Thank you so much for your time. And interesting, in this folder right here, I'll just tell you, is the lawsuit for when one of the pieces of property was Stone Oak Park commercial, and they took it all the way to the state. And this is the transcript. And also, I do have in here the Lewis P. Gaffney's name that was in the 1950 city directory. She bought that lot from Billy in 1979. Thank you so much.
Anyone else can speak? Yes, sir.
Good evening. My name is Kenneth Marolda, and I currently serve on the West Ashley Revitalization Commission. West Ashley has historically not been afforded the attention of planners with regards to our local historic structures. Sure, we all love Charlestown Landing, but there are many smaller scale sites and structures of local significance that haven't been given due attention. In this case, we have a rare example of a vernacular home with an original stone facade. Stone is not a common building material in our area, and this material was specifically imported here from North Carolina to build this structure. The structure is also an example of a historic trend in our area, as it was constructed as a residential house and later converted to commercial use. At least 5 other structures in this corridor have already been demolished in recent years to allow for expansion of car dealerships. In fact, there was originally a second stone house on this site, which was demolished. How much more of our urban fabric do we want to sacrifice to allow one industry to dominate the landscape of this area? I've written before in my comments to this board, and I'll say it again, if the goal is to revitalize West Ashland, as the city is committed to doing, then we have to keep the remaining bits of historic character we have left. I'm unconvinced that trading a vernacular home for yet another car dealership parking lot honors the city's commitments to revitalizing West Ashland. Just because mistakes were made in allowing erosion of the historic fabric in the past, doesn't mean the same mistake should be repeated. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Anyone else? So we're going to go to city staff recommendation.
Thank you, Andy. I do also want to add that we also received a public letter for opposition of demo for this from Charlie Smith. I sent it to the board before all the ones earlier last week. I sent it, so just wanted to put that on the record. Staff observations. While the stone facade is not vernacular to Charleston, it does give this building unique character and alludes to the history of people that occupied the building, as well as the history of the larger regional connection. This form, size, and footprint are similar to the residential buildings directly to the south, and this property was at one time considered part of that neighborhood. The building has received a number of additions on the back, which are not significant. The context of the portion of Savannah Highway has changed, and the building is surrounded by a variety of building types. Regarding this stone house, there's a social connection between Charleston and Flat Rock, North Carolina, which is in the Henderson County. Flat Rock's founders included Charlestonians, and village became known as Little Charleston of the Mountains because of the large number of Low Country South Carolina residents who relocated or vacationed there. Staff comment number 1, the ordinance that discusses demolition and the purview of the Design Review Board states that the board should consider the architectural and aesthetic features of the structure, the nature and quality of the structure, including its architectural fabric, any historical significance, the nature and quality of the surrounding area, and the structure's contribution to the overall streetscape of the area. And staff has examined the above considerations when contemplating demolition for the structure. The building has charm and has an interesting history and is unique structure to West Ashley. We understand that the building is in rough shape, but we feel that it's not beyond repair. And we don't want to see another parking lot on Savannah Highway. Plan West Ashley, adopted by the city of Charleston, does encourage preservation of the community character. So with that, we do recommend denial for full demolition, but approval for demolition of the later additions, with an idea of the owner possibly could add on to the back of this structure and make it a viable commercial property.
Like, how, just from logistics perspective before, with the application for Fulton and their recommendation parcel, is that something that we can briefly support, or will we have to deny it and come back?
No, that's something that you can move forward with now. Mhm.
And just to follow up on Aaron's question, how do we identify, are you referring, can you give a
Yeah.
back up?
Yeah, his image with the, mhm.
Okay, can we get talk about this in discussion?
Sure, sure.
So then we can go to any clarifications by the applicant, either things that's been stated or.
Yes. Yeah, I think we're talking about a building, we're talking about, so they're very much, this is talk about the building. The term vernacular is used a lot tonight. I've never understood what that meant when I was in architecture school. One of the teachers said vernacular is what you do when you can't afford to get it wrong. Vernacular is what you do when you can't afford to get it wrong. you don't build like this, if you're doing vernacular architecture. So to say that this is vernacular to Charleston, it just simply ain't so. We build our roofs with eaves and rakes so that the water sheds from the roof. We don't build with stone, which we talked about. And so I need to make sure that that's clear, that this is not a vernacular Charleston building. I believe that's being misused. I have nothing but respect for Mr. Coleman, Mr. Jacobs, Mr. Geraldo, Mr. Meeks. I think the revitalization of West Ashley is immensely important. But I don't think saving this small structure is going to contribute to that revitalization. I just struggle to see that. And we are here asking for full demolition, but I also want to clarify when we save a building and we add on to it in Charleston, we add on little small bits. We say those additions have to be subservient to the historic structure. Well, imagine the challenges of doing that on such a small structure. So I just don't think that that is a valid solution, but that's not what we're here to ask for. So, but I nothing but respect for the comments tonight, and just sometimes don't always agree. But that's why we have this forum. So thank you.
Thank you. And now we can move into board discussion.
All right, can I follow up on Mary's comment earlier? When you were talking about partial demolition and we're looking at this map, we know that A is the original structure. Can you or someone give us a little bit more delineation? B, C, D, and E represent as far as timeline or chronology?
That I don't have. In the,
When you're looking at this plan down, if I may.
If Donna can give us a.
You know what the timeline is or the chronology as far as the addition? Because when we talk about partial demolition, it worries me that we're going to say, yes, you can take part of it down, but without giving clarity in this regard of what part are we talking about? Any thoughts?
The only thing I have to say about that is looking aerially and what we see in the areas from 49 and 59. I went and looked at the building myself. I'm not even an architect. I can tell you that the back doors, D is more original house. I would say what you're doing A and C might be original, if you look at the areas. And it's the best way to do. I did not do that at all. That's
so A incorporates B. The B is only referring to the dormer above A,
In addition as well.
just the dormer, which is so. Dinos, can you see where I'm pointing on the lower right?
Yes.
B refers to just this portion right here. I don't. Actually, Donna might have had, I think there was one in Donna's letter, I believe, that had an older picture.
So let's say that we deny the demolition without any specificity in regards to splitting the project up. Can the applicant come back at a later time with partial demolition request predicated on a timeline as far as the construction is concerned, or are they just completely denied? I mean, I would hate to send there. Stephen, like Lucas, you guys are bright young minds in this community, and I know y'all possess the great creativity. And seeing your work and your portfolio, I'm very familiar with you, and I know that that you have the capacity and the creativity to figure out a way to get this original structure within the context of everything that might be built on this site. The concern that I have is is that if we're not specific on what pieces come off, then he might be back again in the future trying to explain why part of the historic structure might have been removed. So I guess my question is this: is this an item that is tabled until additional information comes back to us with a chronology, or?
I think that would be a board's decision if we want to table it to allow the applicant to come back with additional information, or if we want to move forward. I think if we have questions with regards to wanting to see, in my opinion, if we have questions that wanted to see information in terms of the year for the add-ons, I would feel better just tabling it as opposed to denying it and then having them come back with a new application for that partial.
We as a board have always used our deferral as kind of a soft denial. If we, we've always said denial is start over, and deferral is your argument may have merit, but you need to prove a little bit more to us too. And so, it's.
And I think that the applicant has had the benefit of hearing from the community now as well. And furthermore, that, I'm old, we actually hunted on the Cabbage Patch years ago.
Wow.
Jim's probably the only other one that may remember that as well back there, but I mean, I remember when Harrison Field was there, we used to grow cabbage back there, we lived right on the field. And it's important to me as well, we've lost so many pieces, as Eric said so eloquently, as to what constitutes the context of West Ashley. We're trying to put them back together, and I know the board, we worked very hard in trying to piece these things back together. So I don't want to curtail the discussion, but I certainly would be willing to make a motion.
I would, if possible, can I get here from the owner?
I'm Brad Eubank with Pamela Ford, Lincoln, and Charleston. We've been an automotive dealer for coming up on 54 years in the Charleston community. We used to be down on Morrison Drive.
Love your dad.
No offense. No offense. But we moved out to Savannah Highway in 1983. Been in business out there since then. Really haven't changed a whole lot of our Pamela Ford location. We did add Lincoln about 2 years ago. Some of you may have been on board then. I think we did a really nice job with that project. We added some sidewalk. We added a lot of new things to make that corner look a lot better. If that's read it. We purchased this property. It's been about a year and a half now. We operated a small accessory facility out in the other building. These two adjacent properties are next door to each other that we own. And we operated that for about a year, and then we closed that, and we're just trying to figure out what we can do with these two properties that are next door to each other to try to make it work. We're not a Tommy Baker, so we're not tearing down IHOPs and fire stations and banks and retail and whatever else is torn down, but it seems like it's been kind of carte blanche. But what I'm looking for is this building does not really go with anything along in this area. And I'm not saying that it didn't at one time. I think it probably did. And I'm not questioning that. But there's not another building like this on Savannah Highway. There's not many residential at all in that area. So it's in very bad condition. A lot of it's been added on. It's got a lot of termite damage. It's in really bad shape, but we've been in business a long time. We've been good neighbors, I think. My first house was in Robinwood, right behind this property. My daughter lives in Burns Downs. We just purchased a house there. So we're very familiar with this area. We've been there a long time. This building doesn't go on this area of Savannah Highway. And so we're looking to try to use this property a different way. We're not quite sure what we want to do with it yet. We don't know if it's going to be automotive or what it could be. But we would like to have some additional parking for the other building. That's what we're.
I don't know, lots of discussion, you know, part of the. And we're still on board with Jackson, so I think the applicant brings a lot of good points. With respect to. Presentation. Any story, I think everybody, so. Doesn't necessarily object to architectural merit, which. Doesn't really have. Serious architectural. It's got so exciting, which again, a very good point about vernacular. It's completely correct about vernacular. That is not a vernacular in terms of building. Yeah, I just think in our guidelines, what's to be cited for demolition, we have the aesthetic features, the quality, contributing quality of the surrounding fabric, not much. And we about street view, again, not down. I think rather than kind of just pull the trigger and say no to the full demolition, that we. I don't think the condition of the building actually doesn't seem that bad. But just architectural merit. Maybe for that.
It's so hard. I mean, I know, Lord knows, the Eubanks have a phenomenal reputation. In the community. But I would personally. I'm of the opinion that there's a bigger story here that has been diminished to a small piece. Right now, if we lose that piece, we lose the whole story, and consequently, it's the concern that I have. But I feel that it may be more advantageous to what was insinuated earlier, that possibly we table this motion and ask the applicant to come back at the next meeting with a little bit more information with regards to any chronology that we could possibly find on the additions, because I just don't personally feel that if we deny a demolition and ask you to retain the original, I don't know if that's enough direction for you. And considering that there are 5 additions that we put on the building, then we're leaving it to the applicant, which is really highly unfair. So I would move that we table the motion and ask the applicant, ask the applicant to come back with a chronology of the additions so that we can get a better understanding of the application.
We defer in our language.
Deferred would be fine. Deferred. With the board comments that we come back with more information with regards to the additions as far as chronology.
So we have the motion for the deferral. Board comment that we just provide a chronology of the building for board's consideration. We have a second.
Well, I guess I'm struggling too with knowing what that exactly means, like what that deferral means. You know, I don't have a great solution either. It's a complicated matter, but I guess I don't quite understand what that deferral means in its price.
It's on the border, it's a difference of the, what is it, the states, how they define. Or what is that, what is the purpose of, for the years? If besides if one is, you know, in the 30s, and then the next year was in the 50s or 60s, if there's certain
If there is significant to the evolution of the building, it gives us a better sense of how to be able to evaluate that's why. And I do know that there's another building on Oak Street that has the masonry just like this. There's another building in Lofty Road. Facade with the masonry. So it's not that it's so independent in terms of its representation. It is relevant in the area. And I think it's a reflection of the influence of the original property owners that they had on the overall development. And I just would feel, I don't know if I, in good conscience, you can send the applicant away. Well, I guess we're not, the motion died, right? For the lack of second.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're still in discussion. So I would feel terrible to send the applicant away with a motion that involves some of it, and we don't know what that sum is.
I mean, just from my point of view, I mean, I'm one of the first to say in Charleston, stone, I mean, I fight this all the time, especially with a primary client that comes from North Carolina and, you know, everything's done. Is that, yeah, I generally don't have any connection, you know, stone and Charleston just doesn't do anything, it's alien. But it does, once again, you are talking about how an area develops and the connection to that area. I think that in establishing the chronology, you're saying, what are the things that we're trying to preserve? What are the things that are of a later generation that, you know, if we preserve this piece, then what could you come back and do the incremental changes that should have been done the first time?
I think the city's I believe staff's on the right direction. I just think we need to get more direction to the applicant to forward. But they can, I mean, with all due respect, I hear exactly what's being said. And this is not, I would agree, it's not vernacular to Charleston, but it is vernacular to this area, to the specific area that was Harrison Acres, was the property. And it's representative of an era that is past now. And unfortunately, we didn't have the opportunity to save the architects of the building next door. But to indicate that there is no other examples within the immediate context of this area is not entirely accurate. There are specific areas in this space that have the influence of the stonework. So within that specific space, there is a vernacular language that can develop for the time period. So consequently, you can't look at Charleston as a whole when you look at its microcosm, which is Stone Oak, and its significance within the context of that area. I mean, if that's the case, then I don't know if anybody has reconsidered the deferral.
I think you can make the motion again. We'll see if it's not.
Would the board entertain the motion to do it?
I'll second.
Yeah,
Because I make a motion to deferral.
Andreas said make the motion, Stephanie has seconded. Yes, we have either further discussion or I can call roll. Aaron,
Yes, in favor.
Lucas. So it does carry. I am in favor of it. So it does carry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we will move to item number 2 on the agenda, which is 1645 Road. This is requesting demolition, approval of demolition of a one-story house over 50 years of age. David?
Yes, thank you.
We've actually seen this now.
No, we actually haven't. It started to go before the board, but then they pulled from the agenda, so it's never been seen by the board. So The red triangle, I'm sorry, thumbtack, if you look at the screen, is the location of this project, 1640 Folly. This is a small home. I think we could use the word vernacular for this one. Built in 1935. Here's a little closer view. It used to have a twin building right next to it that looked just like this one. And then on the corner, there was a corner grocery store, which were all built at the same time in the 1930s. And then here's a view of the house. Sorry. A closer view. Sorry. And with that, I'll turn it over to the applicant.
Good evening, Nathan Shooty with Boulevard, Patterson Smith, Charleston, South Carolina. I'm here on behalf of our client and the owner Charles Wilson of this property to formally request demolition of this structure. Contained within your package are a number of documents, and David, you had referenced providing or including one that additional survey.
I had sent it to him, but it's not in the presentation.
So, all right, we'll get to that in a moment. This survey is important because there were multiple structures on this site. This was arguably the third of three structures. There was a corner store, literally on the corner. There was the Halter house proper, which was the family's house that sat in the middle. And then they had a tenant house. The tenant house is what remains today. Unfortunately, it is the only structure remaining on the property. The piece that was probably the most beautiful and the element that was the community center, we lost due to a traffic incident a number of years ago. This is a very dangerous corner. It does have a light, but unfortunately vehicles drove through it and we lost the structure there on the corner. As David suggested, it was built in the 30s. Go to the next slide. I want to go to the photo. So these are some pictures of the structure. They're actually a couple of years old. They, however, do give you a better idea of what the structure looks like. And we'll talk about its condition in a moment. You go to the aerial.
Am I going the right direction?
I think so.
Are you not talking about the historic or?
Yeah, the historic, the
Oh, the yellowish
the yellow
picture.
This one is the one I'm looking for.
Yeah. Here.
Okay. Sorry, I thought it was near the front.
Oh, gosh, where is it? I know it's in here.
This is the photo we're looking for.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
All right.
number 11.
Okay, I don't have those numbers anymore. It's part of the same, part of the overall.
Yeah.
Here we go. I'm sorry.
Yeah, there we go. So again, the structure on it. So the only element that still remains is the tenant house, which is the third structure in from the corner. It was very similar to the main house, not identical, but it was very similar. But unfortunately, again, we've lost the two elements on the corner. To speak to that a little bit, Folly today is very different than what this photo represented. This was a time that was very much about a lot of things, and today's a lot of things: neighborhood, future, agriculture. But this corner was a unique place insofar as it was the corner store. It was a community gathering point, and we'd like to see that into its future. This residential structure, however, we don't believe fits into that future. We're looking at the vision of Folly Road as a vibrant community centering kind of place. In Trimble, this intersection is kind of in the middle of the future vision of that to be a neighborhood gathering place. Unfortunately, today, this existing structure is very much in disrepair. Really wasn't constructed very well to begin with. It doesn't have a conventional foundation, doesn't have a lot of things. It does have a few characteristics per the inventory survey that was shared with you by David of what might have been vernacular architecture in the area. that said, kind of an interesting coincidence for this property is it was surveyed as part of a historical survey in 1989. It was evaluated for its architectural merit, as well as the other structures that were on the site. And at that time, and even to this day, it was designated or deemed in review by the State Historic Preservation Office as not appropriate for preservation or inclusion, I should say that very carefully, was not designated for inclusion in
National Registry.
National Registry. Thank you, David. So although there are a few characteristics of this house that are vernacular, do reflect some of what we see in this area, they did not determine that it was a structure that was an example that deserved or belonged to be part of that preservation. So with that, I started to speak a little bit about the existing condition of this house and a little bit more about why we are here tonight. We'd like to see this corner become a vibrant and energized corner along Folly Road. This structure doesn't really contribute to that. In its current state, we can't move it. There isn't much left of it. And repurposing it for this community centering kind of idea really doesn't fit within the vision and where we would like to go with this property. And so we're here tonight to ask for the demolition of it so that we can do to its fullest and most meaningful a project on the entirety of the property that brings back the community centering nature that the corner store once did. And so with that, again, we're here tonight to for consideration for full demolition of this project. I left everything out. I think I can answer any more questions. There's a bunch of detail in the structural surveys that we provided. Let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, I respectfully request the board approve the application for demolition of this structure.
Thank you. More questions? Certainly.
You mentioned a minute ago that you would not be able to move the structure. Can you expound upon that a little bit, just to help us understand?
So the base of the building doesn't have enough existing structure to be able to lift it. We tried to lift it off of the remnants of the foundation that are still there and collapse in and of itself. That's our biggest challenge, quite frankly. That's your question.
Thank you, David. May I ask you a question about in 2018, this was when it came to the board. And before the facility, we looked at it, position at that point in time was that even though it did not come to the board, my personal position in structures. We're using so many of the little artifacts along James Island and Folly Road that we defined previously. What has been done in the last 4 years that, because I know the owner understood, can you delineate what has been done in the last 4 years that has moved towards stabilizing or protecting this building in terms of its condition to minimize the decline?
That is a question I can't answer. I haven't been involved with the project long enough to be able to really tell you the activities on that site in that period of time. So I apologize. I don't have.
It wasn't a loaded question. I was just curious.
I just don't know. So,
Thank you.
the owner is here. Charles.
Well, can you speak to that question?
Sure, I can speak to many questions.
Okay. Yeah.
Let's stay on that.
Okay. Introduce yourself.
Charles Wilson. Thank you for having me. In the last 4 years, nothing has been done for the house. When this property was in Charleston County, the reason that the kitchen is open with the joist underneath, because there was asbestos in the kitchen. So the county had no issue when the car crashed into the corner store on the corner. It was halfway demolished at that point. They had no issue with a demolition permit to finish and clean the site up, so it wasn't an ongoing hazard. There wasn't a fence around the property. People were dumping, there was a lot of different issues going on. And this house was the same thing, and, you know, I went to get a demolition permit and said, okay, you just have to have the asbestos survey done, which I did. And then, we didn't demolish it because I didn't realize that we were gonna have this issue. I didn't realize that it was gonna shift. We annexed the property into the city, and then the city has different rules, and we've been doing our best to follow those, but we never bought the property with the intention of keeping the house. There was, you know, there a storm 6 or 7 months ago knocked the chimney down on the roof, been collapsing further. And I think one of the most relevant levels of history, if you're asking a question about the house, is how does Mr. Halter feel? His dad built the house. He grew up in the house. This was the Halter property. He was in 2 car wrecks. They were not his fault, but he was suffering a lot of back pain and was on medication and different issues. It's hard for me to get him on the phone now. I did get him on the phone about this, but he didn't want to speak to a public forum like this, which is, you know, the property's sold, it's gone, it's done. He's kind of disconnected from it, but he said, you know, historic, or are you crazy? There's no history at all about this house. My dad built it. He didn't build it to code. It's falling apart. I bought this, you know, I sold this property to you and I thought you were going to do something with it. You still haven't done anything. And that was in 2015. And, you know, I've been working on this now for almost 10 years and a lot of time and energy in my life, and feel very fortunate to have connected with McMillan, Patton Smith, because I think that everything they do turns out great. And they have a huge focus on community development, community improvement. And that's what we're trying to do. And I don't think the house fits into that at all. I don't think that I am different than anyone that owned this property with an interest in demolishing it so that we can pave the way forward instead of being stuck in the past. In certain situations, it makes sense, but in this situation, I don't think so. Folly Road is kind of a hodgepodge of confusion between the past and the future and lack of investment, and the Rethink Folly Road plan is all about rethinking and creating a better future based around sustainability and creating.
I think we've gotten a little bit further.
Okay, sorry about that.
So any
I love your question.
Thanks.
Any additional questions? Okay. So we did receive one letter from Karen
Minigan.
Sorry. I'm actually trying to read my writing of the Preservation Society in opposition to the demolition. So do we have any public comment? None. We'll go to staff recommendations.
Thank you, Andy. Staff comments. The ordinance that discusses demolition in the purview of the design review board states that the board should consider the architectural and aesthetic features of the structure, the nature and quality of the structure, including the architectural fabric, any historical significance, the nature and quality of the surrounding area, and the structure's contribution to the overall streetscape of the area. The existing building was part of a three complex site that featured a pair of sister houses in the corner store known as the Halter House store. In the history documentation, the store was one of only 3 on James Island, and it served as a general store selling food and building products. The center building was lost first, and the store structure was lost within the last decade due to damage from an automobile. The complex is documented in the book, A History of James Island, Slave Descendants and Plantation Owners, the Bloodline. The existing house is the last piece of this history. The existing building was constructed in 1935 and was owned by African Americans. It was known as the Halter House, as the Halter Residence, and a great example of vernacular frame bungalow structure of its time. It is a reminder of the early history of this area. Rethink Folly, a complete street initiative adopted by the city of Charleston, encourages the preservation of neighborhood character and scale. The existing building sits towards the center of a unique shaped property, making redevelopment more of a challenge. Relocating the house on the property could be beneficial as it would save the historic structure and allow for the restoration of any necessary elevating, preserve, and set the tone for redevelopment of a similar scale and character, and provide accommodation for easier redevelopment. Staff have consulted the city preservationists who feel the structure could be relocated on the site to accommodate the future development. And demolition by neglect is not a reason to be awarded demolition approval. So staff does recommend denial for the demolition.
Does the applicant have any response or clarification to that?
Try to speak very specifically to this. The structure is in a challenging position. We have looked at moving it. There are letters included in the application regarding moving it. We are unable to do that. We think that the story that was told is about the community centering element of what happened here on this site in that corner store, not necessarily what happened with the Stewart House or the tenant, the Halter tenant house. And we'd like to celebrate that and to do that in the most effectively and most meaningfully way possible. We believe is through the demolition of this structure and the purposeful redevelopment of this site into a community gathering space. So again, we ask for support for the demolition of this structure.
Thank you. We'll move into board discussion.
I would make one more comment.
Is it directly related to staff's comments?
Yes.
Okay.
I personally met with 4 different house moving companies. All came out at different times and not one of them was confident in their ability to move this house. That was several years before working on the Mills House in Smith, and kind of like he explained, the way the house was built to no code when it was built, it would just sandwich in the middle and collapse. And I don't know who else to call other than the 4 biggest people in the southeast, which is what I did. So.
I will have to comment that the city preservationists who thought that did not visit the site. Mhm.
We're in board discussion.
Well, I think, you know, in the letter, that was gonna be my question, the city conservation group felt that they thought the house should be moved, and I was gonna ask if the city had any documentation of that, but as I'm learning, they did not go on the site. It would sound like there's maybe an assumption that it could be moved. And so I think having letters from actual structure engineers,
Can it be disassembled?
yes.
Maybe that's what they were assuming.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
And we've done that.
yeah, it is disassembled.
Yeah, I will say that I did. I knew the Halter growing up in this area. I will say that the likelihood that this is not built to anything. That it is not anything to say about the Halter, but just say how this area was developed and built.
If you take out one nail, it might collapse.
Probably not, may not get it all the way out. You know, it really is. Yeah, I will say that I don't think we can. When we can't ask what they intend to do to say, but we can also take into consideration any statements or saying what they could do with the site. We have to really focus on what this is. And yeah, the area has really lost its character. And I will say, you know, it's much different than when this was built, and that store was really probably a byway to people going from Charleston out to Folly Beach. And then, you know, it served some community. Asset, you know, for, you know, during the week, you know, when that was happening. It's gone, it's long gone. I mean, there's a huge ice building across the street, it's now building some things. I don't know, I'm not,
A lot of what people think about interest, but a lot of, comments have been centered around the rethink, that's called rethink.
I think that's mostly focused on the we think Polly is saying that you're to preserve what, you know, what the characters there.
Not master plan, and
Yeah.
this section should be, as you said, a community.
I don't think, I don't think we can. As a board, really, you know, because we don't know what. And, you know, they may have all the best intentions and it may not ever get. I mean, like you said, I'm from James Island. I know what this is. I just don't. Is you know. That's just kind of a feeling of somebody who is from the, you know, somebody else may have a different. Feeling. It is, I really do think of the site in the cornerstone, probably what most people would think of.
I won't say this respectfully, because I do know what it takes to maintain properties. But the reason I asked the question about what has been done to stabilize the building over the last 4 years, is because as we all know, we have to differentiate between demolition warranted versus demolition by neglect. And it's a tough thing. It really is a tough thing as a public board member to sit and review. And then I understand that the current owner purchased the property in 2015 is Wilson's kind enough to share. And then since 2018, when we were out there, nothing has been done whatsoever in order to protect the building, protect the investment. As far as the structure is concerned, and I do know, having worked with a multitude of old historic structures, that whereas they may not be fully moved, they can be disassembled and reestablished, which, and you know, the unfortunate aspect of it, I used to live on Folly Beach as a child growing up. And driven Folly Road so much, and again, similar to the last applicant, we're losing just so much of that context in terms of the evolution, historical evolution of this area. And it is a regardless of how it's constructed at this point, it was a fine example architecturally of what used to occupy predominantly Folly Road. This struggle. If you struggle to allow the convention, I would probably. I would probably oppose the convention.
The yellow tape around it, is that because the building department team is building us in at danger collapsing on?
I have no idea.
Oh, okay, I thought maybe the city
Yeah.
was that because of them being this and
No.
the collapsing. For me, for this building, not unless I hear more, I'm leaning towards. I'm really towards the college. I don't know. if it's. This is a million and reasonable someplace out, and I mean, where? Why? And I be built better than what it is now, they have to reassemble, they have to reassemble the code. I'm guessing, so I'm just not. I'm just not feeling and understanding and hearing what Andy said. I just still not compelled to understand why I would go to say, the grow house. When the other two, the significant one is gone. And the main house is gone, but I know it's still.
I don't know, I agree with a lot of what Dina said, and that, you know, if we want to do anything to protect these last remaining bits of the vernacular of what this place used to be, the ones that are left are gonna be damaged, and they're gonna be hard to save, and they're gonna be hard to put back together, but I think that makes them, in a way, even more important, because we're at risk of losing any reference to, you know, the past. And I think that there are, and maybe this is a bigger question and not specific to this application, but I think that I worry that the approach continues to be clear the site and build something new, as opposed to how can we find creative ways to integrate these interesting pieces of the past into the future? How can we design with them? And I'm not convinced this isn't an opportunity to do that in a way that could create, you know, an economically viable place that still pays homage to the past. And I don't see a strong enough argument personally for tearing it down just because it's in bad shape now. And because other buildings got torn down. That's not a good argument in my opinion.
And I was just gonna say, and I agree with property owner, he has a wonderful creative architect. And who always brings easy projects before us. And I do believe that, again, with the creative aspects and demonstration, their portfolio, I think they can find a way to do this, and I know that they do a lot of presentation. I just struggle with these. It's hard to look at them on a one-by-one basis as opposed to a collective aspect in a setting. And just fearful that the entire era of what was this Boulevard area was going to be lost in favor of this, but the Ice House is an example of what happens. You've got using the pieces.
And you know, one thing that I would be interested in knowing, is that I think the discussion on the team, that like the board of the walk through one that applicant come for us, but how involved is Preservation Society, because that was 40 years ago and nothing's happened, and I'm concerned that another 4 years and nothing happens, and we're back to where one the building is even in worse condition. And if the concern about saving is that we work with Preservation Society, have they done anything and try to help preserve or stabilize this building?
I don't think, I don't think that's the mission. They will encourage and provide the resources.
Right, that's what I'm saying, that they come from the finding resources.
If only if they're opposed. I mean, my experience with them for 6 years, were extremely helpful with approach them and ask them for guidance and assistance. And certainly will help reinterpret Secretary of State's presentation in a variety of other issues.
I don't know if you can ask if y'all have had conversations with them. I mean, I know they wrote a letter,
I might go both ways.
but I don't know if y'all had.
I tried to explain that we never had an idea in the world that there would be an issue developing this property further. We just didn't know there would be a problem. And then 2018, part of that was some type of confusion about the historic survey saying that it was historic or that it was examined with no historic value. So there was, some confusion along the way, and I explained Charleston County having no issues with it and the steps I was taking to do that, and then the annexation of the city, new rules, changes, confusion, time. So we
They have motion.
Well, I mean, I don't know my position, I'll just throw it out. I support the city's position.
I'll second that.
Motion, we have a motion for denial based on city staff's comments on debate.
Yes.
We have a second from Aaron. Stephanie?
No one favor, or
Yeah.
no,
You oppose the motion?
yes, no.
Just oppose the motion. I abstain. No, no, I was like, I want the wrench in the.
Oh, okay.
totally.
I didn't hear Lucas's vote,
Contest.
so no as well.
Yeah, so we're tied. Right. No, I was joking.
Oh, no.
No, I could. It is a very difficult. No, I mean, I think that the applicant deserves it. It's just, it's not an easy answer. I don't think that anybody here. I mean, I think notwithstanding the comments previously. I do think that. So I vote in favor. So there's.
Can you repeat that a little louder for the,
I was
For
just
the
saying
recording.
that it does, I do vote in favor of the Andreas motion, so it does carry 2-3. And so we do deny demolition. Thank you. So we'll be moving to application number 3,
okay, sure.
1513 Savannah Highway. This is request preliminary approval of the addition of addition to the Mercedes dealership in New.
We did get a message from outside of the room that people could keep their voices up again, please. Thank you for the recording. Just a little bit of context. If you look at the screen, this is the location of the property, 1513 Savannah. Little closer location. Current view. The front portion here is what they would like to demolish and do an addition. It's not 50 years old, so they don't need DRB approval for the demolition. Another view into the site. And let's turn it over to the applicant, please.
Thank you.
Hey.
My name is Billy Bishop with GBA, presenting on behalf of the applicant, as the applicant, presenting for the Baker Motor Company. So since we last presented, the main kind of focus and comments that we got from you were studying the landscape palette, kind of understanding some of the showing some more context as far as the existing trees that are to be removed or to keep. And we've since then added all of that to there. We are proposing keeping all of the existing vegetation on Savannah Highway and only just adding to it to help beautify that, adding a small retaining wall so that it carries throughout the rest of the site and kind of goes with the context of the other dealerships that are on this block. Architecturally, we've just further developed the current design. The only real change, which was a modification of the front elevation, was looking at the what the board called the swoop to the front. And after studying the design feature, it was confirmed with Mercedes-Benz that this is an integral part of your design motif. However, we did study the elevation and we made revisions to the shape, proportions, and transparency of that, which you can see on the front elevation. If you actually go to the elevations, it probably shows it a little bit better. You can see the before, where we were last time and where we are now. But other than that, that's the main change that's happened. The rest is actually stayed relatively the same as the previous application. You can see here where we were currently in the red at the top, where we were in the last presentation, and then just kind of softening that swoop element, which is part of their, again, like I said, Mercedes whole design motif. It's actually in their new Evolution logo, which is the design language for this. And that's where we go today. Other than that, that's, sorry, it's a short presentation, but it's very similar. All we've done is really. Yeah. I was like, I could go farther into this, but I mean, really, it's any more comments? Yeah, I mean, but essentially we confirmed some of the architectural language based on the structural, now that we have sizing of those members, kind of understanding the connections, and just really confirming and further developing where we were in the previous session. Thanks.
Do we have any public comment on this application? Seeing none. Staff comments, recommendations.
Thank you, Andy. Staff is satisfied with the revisions that the applicants have made in response to the last board meeting. We support the change to the curved panels on the front facade. All the previous staff and board comments were addressed. Regarding the plant palette, if the board could comment on if the palette is acceptable to be more native as they had asked. The drift rose shrubs, pittosporum, and Lamardra grass were removed from the plant list and 2 miscanthus grasses were added. But we do recommend preliminary approval within a review by staff.
I'll let you ask questions during the answers time. Staff, do you have any?
We do have Boulevard engineering here that is very landscape power function.
I have a question for staff, though, really quickly, just to clarify, so I want to make sure that I'm looking at the most recent plant schedule. Because you had mentioned that they had taken out Lamandra and Pittosporum, but they still showed up in the one that I have, so I didn't know if I just wanted to make sure I was reviewing something up to date or
Oh,
if that
boy.
was oversight or if I have an older version.
You know, I'm sorry about that. I wonder if I was looking at the.
I don't necessarily have a problem with it. I just wanted to
Right.
make sure that I was looking at the right thing because I read your comment on it.
Okay, well, I can't check right now, but you could ignore that comment.
It's on the last page of the application. Evelyn's black. Ellen. Like the very last.
There it is. Let me
There you
zoom.
go. Yeah, okay, yeah, that's the same one that I have. Okay. And-
Okay, my apologies. That was a mistake. Mhm.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we weren't looking at the folder for-
Yeah, sorry about the confusion.
That's the only question.
So we're in the discussion. Now, from my point of view, that I would prefer to see. This campus still tends to be, aggressive.
Yeah.
And so, that would be my real comment, on how it would deal with the actual remove this one. Breeze grass really isn't,
Yeah, I'm good with that.
fruit throws, just,
Right.
yeah, so the pit and the two miscanthus, I would say, substitute with pit. And then a variety would be.
Or, I mean, there's a lot of grass.
Or any sort of grass, just not miscanthus. So.
I can, unless you have any other comments, I'll make a motion for approval. I guess with no comments. That's earlier, the removal, remove the fish farm and consider a substitution for this.
And made a motion for preliminary approval with final review by staff. With I'm ready to remove this form and find a substitution for the Tunis campus. Lucas. If Lucas is in favor of the motion. Enos.
Yes.
Enos is in favor of the motion. I'm also in favor. So we're. That passes. Very improved.
Thank you.
So we will move to, the next agenda item. And, number 4, which would be 2310 Henry Teckenberg Drive. And Eric is here, we'll let him take that.
So, I didn't have any context for this since we've seen it before, so if you want to jump right in. I didn't have any context to show beforehand, just because we've seen it before, so you can jump right in.
I'm here to represent Dominion Energies for their fruitful project off of Texas. To make sure you're not going to AS 101. Sure. Perfect, thank you. This project got approval through preliminary last year in November. And then we paused it because there was a 2.3 acre parcel in the Plan West side of their site that became available. And so we went through the process of getting that land under contract and then getting it installed into, getting it approved through council into the PUD, the Essex Farm PUD. And so that process took until July, middle of July to get that accomplished. And now we're back showing the hopefully improved plans to allow them a larger crew area. This is still right there. It's the east plan east. They have their existing, they call it Savage Road crew quarters. That's both a substation and a crew quarters. And then we are significantly expanding that over to the left. There on Tecklenburg and on Savage Road.
I put this slide in just to show the
Right.
additional property that you all purchased.
Thank you, David. That is 2.3 acres. And so now our plan is created with that. Can you go back to the site plan? Please?
Yeah.
So we have redesigned the access to the site to where we now have an access far on the plan left. We were informed that we would not get free curb cut along Tecklenburg. So previously we had an entrance directly into a parking area, and we were informed that was not going to happen. So the site arrangement has modified slightly. Also, when we acquired the 2.3 acres, there are 2 grand trees that we were having to do, that we are designing around and incorporating. So those are on the plan also. But essentially, the concepts of what we shared with you last year are exactly the same. This is a crew building. This is a storm center for them. It would be basically built as an essential structure. There also is a LEED silver site. All of their new construction has to be built LEED silver, and so it will be a LEED silver facility. The planned south side of the truck shed will have solar panels along its entirety to be able to help us meet that. But they will not be on a raise out on the site like we do in other locations. Can you go to the next slide, please? Some of the context of the medical facilities that are around our building along Tecklenburg and part of Essex, Essex Farm side. The next building, I'm shooting the next slide.
I think I skipped.
One of the things I wanted to point out is this is a very dense site as far as existing work, and Dominion doesn't necessarily want to be visible to the community either, because they like these facilities to not be front and center. So our plan is to leave as much of the perimeter as we can. Now, we have to put in walkways that the city wants us to put in. We have to put in a bus stop, which we're going to do. And then you can see a transmission right away that goes through the site. And it has its own minimized landscaping requirements. And so those vistas that are created from that transmission right away, we plan to screen in the fence. Next slide. We can go to the L001.
Here we go.
There we go, right there. I wanted to stop here on the landscape plan for a minute, because this is the concepts that we got through both conceptual and preliminary last year. This is the same plant material and the concepts that we'd asked Jody to migrate towards last year. And so he incorporated those same concepts on this plan. So I just wanted to make that go to the next slide, please. So to our exactly plan west, we're over 200 feet from our adjacent building, and then depending upon where you measure along Tecklenburg, we're anywhere from 60 to greater than 100 feet off of Tecklenburg for the site section y'all request. And then, so this is one of the entrances, the truck entrance, right in, right out only, that's closest to the Savage Road corner, but this is off of Tecklenburg. So this is probably the biggest view that you would have into the site, and we will screen that with the appropriate landscaping along the fence. Next slide. This is right along the Charleston water access. They have that Brown Road is their access to a facility they have, and they have an easement that goes across the Dominion property for that. I know that Charleston Water and Dominion are in properties to try to make their Charleston Waters Drive more secure. So we may take that fence you see on the right and put it on the left side, it would still be on the Viney's property. But those discussions between those two entities are ongoing. But still, it's gonna be dense, as you can see, as you look into the site. Next slide, please. This is the front entry for this particular version. You see a wet pond to the right, but I just want to say that our ponds are not going to be wet. They're going to be dry to where we can maintain them, cut them, and they'll just fill up. And then it rains per Trey's design, and Trey Linton, board members here today, we have specific questions. But the building architecture itself is the same, and as far as materials go, we had to revise the layout because we couldn't just take the floor plan and slide it into the web. But we are using built panel construction that reveals and paint as the material, and then standing seam bronze tone roof will be the main roof color. The truck shed. Also on the main caps where we provide the bracing for it, it also will have the built panel enclosures there so that the architecture remains consistent throughout. And this aerial, to be honest with you, we took some trees out just so you can see the building, but that's right along Tecklenburg to the left there. But that building is really going to still, is going to be screened a lot more than what you see. So if y'all want to go back into the floor plan, I can, but I was going to pause there since we had presented this last year, unless you want to know more about what's happening inside of it.
I think we're good, most of us. Seen the project before, this is probably maybe, but.
December, are you talking about when they were last
Yeah,
year?
and I think. we're good on top of it. Okay, perfect. Any questions?
You had an outdoor patio area.
Yes, sir.
before. Is that still?
It is not part of the plan this time. The way the way the building changed and its orientation just didn't make sense anymore. And so we took it off. We have a small gable that sticks out the Tecklenburg, but the pergola has gone away just because it didn't make it logic with the interior. That we actually have the outdoor area on the interior of the site now, not the Tecklenburg side.
So they still have outdoor sitting areas.
That's correct.
Any other questions? Is there anyone here from the public that would like to speak on this application? It's not David, staff recommendations, please.
Thank you. The applicant made it past, in the past, they made it past preliminary approval in December of 2021. This is a new site plan and building design as a result of the applicant purchasing additional property to the west. Staff approves of the design direction and the height, scale, mass is appropriate. Staff comment number 1, staff recommends more fenestration on the north facade facing Henry Tecklenburg. Actually, I don't think we made it to that elevation, did we? Yeah, here we go. So on this elevation, this is the north elevation facing Henry Tecklenburg. So we just recommend some more fenestration on that side of the building. Number 2, staff recommends an offset or bump out in the north and possibly south facades where the height of the building increases, so the facades are not so long and flat. Number 3, the parking lot right off Savage Road has grown a little and become more defined. Staff would like to see the landscape added, some landscape added to between the parking lot and Savage Road, and or a minimum 3-foot screen wall added to that location with landscape on the Savage Road side. Wall material should match the material on the building. Staff recommends precast concrete as in the mechanical area, screen wall, or the column bases at the front entry to the building. Number 4, staff would like to see a little more variety in the plant palette. There's one plant symbol and the planting plan that's not on the plant list, SR. Now, this last comment, I want to ask the landscape architects if maybe I should scratch this one because I thought these were wet detention ponds. I was recommending pockets of native plantings around the detention pond, but I just learned they're going to be dry detention. But with that, we do recommend conceptual approval.
Thank you. Anything you'd like to respond to or clarify?
The only thing I would like to comment about is that lowest elevation there, that's the Tecklenburg side, and I will call David if that's appropriate after, make sure I understand the additional administration there. But that is the storm room wall, that facade there, and it's intended to be robust as far as its construction. So, but I'll call you.
But it's only if the board adopts it.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to the comment, I just want to make sure I understand what it means.
Thank you. We are now in board discussion.
I think my point of view, David. I think the fact that they're driving into. And that adds to the need.
Okay, good.
You know, graphics, whatever. You know, in my point of view, you know. Yes, while this is the. Probably plant list that we ended up with last time. For the size of the property, there doesn't seem to be a lot of variety. Especially we have one canopy tree. Yeah, I can see some more variety. Yeah, as you say, you know, while it's a densely wooded site now, I think once you start taking away what's behind it, you know, take away the background, you don't find that it's very transparent to existing background there.
Yeah, I would like, to that point, I agree with everything you said, it's a request. That the, I don't know if we can put it to the.
Landscape,
Yeah, landscape numbers.
Or-
Yeah, there you go.
it's in two pieces.
Oh, the other one,
Yeah.
on the floor, where that new parking lot is.
Mhm.
I understand that they're planning to leave because the trees have been clearing the understory. So I think that they should wrap the understory plantings around that side that doesn't have any landscaping proposed. I just wanted to extend it all the way down the parking lot. I think that's a fair ask. Because once they clear the understory, it'll be pretty visible even at that distance. So if we just buffer it up with some place that we like, then I think that'll help. So just, you know, wrap the landscaping all the way around the parking lot. I am curious where you say that screen wall will be added. I'm not opposed to that, but it is in that region. I don't know if we'll be able to do that.
Well, I think I was just recommending for right in here,
Yeah, but that, there's like a. Utility.
but I think that's over here.
It's the whole width of that.
Oh, okay.
It goes like from the dash line to the dash line below. I'm fine with the wall if it can get terminated, but I don't know that. So if not, we can always plan for, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were to go with some details in the shrub layer, understory layer, I think that would take care of your problem and avoid the structural issue.
And just extend it for the full perimeter.
In training, you indicated that we were talking about demonstration, what might be available to the demonstration. Do you feel that there's a possibility that the demonstration will be placed as a component of the training room facing?
The training room is actually specifically placed on that wall to be part of the storm room, the more robust built area. Because that is the place where when we bring outside crews or then brings outside crews to work, that's where they get trained on the system. And so that area of the building has to be up, no matter what happens to the balance of the building.
When you say it has to be,
It has to be up and running. It has to be occupiable.
so the idea of additional penetration is there.
I'm not opposed to that, but when you say that, I assume you're talking about windows. You know, we can certainly do things like spandrel glass to where we can build robustness behind it.
Okay, thank you. I was just curious. I would get it spend with this. But David, may I ask you regarding staff comments? Number 2, you indicated offset bump out in the north and possibly the south elevations. What are you doing?
So right here where the building height increases, we were thinking, right, so, and I wasn't suggesting out or I was suggesting either. Maybe it bumps out a little bit, maybe it bumps in, but
Just
just
breaks the elevator.
just break up the facade.
Yeah, that's.
Mhm.
What is that, about day in between?
Mhm.
So basically just a break in the sun.
Right. Mhm.
And that's on the interior side or the technical?
Oh, I was saying one or either one or both. So I think it's kind of up to the board. I was suggesting one or both.
Any other comments? Or motion?
Just gonna comment on materials and. Just by scale, and that's it for them.
Comment on the-
Right, that's a role like that, right? Yes. Be nice if that you could. See that role. In probably a bit to match that.
And typically they are bronze. And we just listed them.
So like, suggesting that
Matches the wall.
Matches the wall versus the roof.
So it's not
It will not be white, it will. But matching the wall is not.
Any other comments or motion?
glad to read those. Except for the approval with staff comments. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. And with board comments as an explanation on item 2. To create some regulation on that facade, whether it's expanded or if there's a height created. In the north and the south facade to break the lane. And then the roll door match the color of the paint.
And then I guess that I amend the motion. Okay, I'll second and then add a comment that the landscape be extended around the full perimeter of that parking area. The proposed
Sorry, landscape to be.
She can add, what she said to your motion.
That's what I'm trying to.
Yeah.
That the land and one of the board comments, the landscape is in around the parking.
The full perimeter of the parking area.
Full perimeter of the parking.
So we have a motion. Motion for conceptual approval with staff comments 1 through 5, along with board comments. Number 1 regarding staff comment number 2 to create undulations on the north and south facade. 2, match roll-up doors to the wall color. 3, landscape shall be extended around the full perimeter of the parking area. Is there a second? Aaron, any further discussion? Call roll, Andy,
Yes.
Lucas, Stephanie, yes, from me as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is number 5, 829 St. Andrews Boulevard, requesting preliminary approval for the construction of a new 5-story mixed-use building containing retail and residential units.
Whenever you're ready, Nathan, you can jump right in.
Nathan, how, what, 15
Take-
minutes?
I was like 36 minutes.
Do not.
Yeah, somewhere else. I wasn't kidding.
You really want to.
I really want 36 minutes. Maybe negotiable for 34. David, would you start on slide L2.0, please?
I'm sorry, repeat that, please.
L2.0, please. Good evening, Nathan Judy with Bill and Patterson Smith. My pleasure this evening to present 829 St. Andrews, project to a number of times. I'll be presenting tonight along with John Winters, we also have landscape architect, Thomas Hutton, and we also have Bob McGill with us from Thomas Hutton on the civil side to help answer any questions. I do want to be fairly deliberate about this presentation. Maybe it's my mistake in the last visit here to try to push this too fast. And I want to be fairly deliberate. So you'll bear with us a little bit. I want to walk all the way around the project. And in our typical fashion, we're going to start on St. Andrews Boulevard. So I'm going to connect the design intent to the design execution through this presentation, both on the building itself, and then in complement with John's compliment on what's happening and extending things out. Slide A101, please. You'll see in the submittal set all of the plan sheets, A101 through 106. We haven't changed the organization of the building program. So it's simply coming here to say that since the last time you saw this, there's been no fundamental change to any part of the building program, any part of the building program or organization or influences that are making the same. My focus tonight is really again on the detail and the implementation and execution, what we said we were going to do or want to do. So David, slide A310. We're going to start over on St. Andrews with a perspective view approach effectively from the south. A310 is an overall overall elevation of St. Andrews. This composition developed out of multiple conversations with this board because smaller scale, basically 2-story on and on going through the plan south of the left-hand side of the elevation is to the bridal shop, a larger masonry element along the street that turns the corner and there's a public little courtyard in between. The body, the larger mass of it is set back. So we're going to walk through these elements here and we're going to talk about what happens on the ground along this streetscape. So David, slide A340A. So again, here, this is the smaller masonry facade on affectionately the south side of the site next to the bridal shop there in the corner. This massive, again, we worked many times to in many conversations with the board to develop and creates a wonderful growth to the project as the project moves north down to St. Andrews. Now, early on in this project, we were challenged to find that function for this wonderful part of the commercial neighborhood, the Avondale context. And in that exploration, we started to play with how do we purposefully create an experience out of these facades. And so there's a couple of different approaches present in the two masonry facades. And this facade here on the south, or this building element on the south, is not a facade, it has full shapes. We made that expression external to the masonry itself. So next slide. So here we begin to see some of the details of that. I'm going to start at the ground, but in a little vignette of elevation here on the left, you see the retail space, this narrow picture frame, and the punch penetration above it, as well as the cornice. That little piece of articulated space formed around those punched openings is an extension of aluminum that projects 16 inches out of the face of the building. It creates a zone past the luminary experience. And we did it purposefully here next to the bridal shop in this way, so it extends out into the public realm and what happens on the ground. When I say it extends out, it allows us to set the mass of the building back a little bit further, but still preserve the depth and kind of the playfulness of that picture frame. So you see those details on the right-hand side. This page also introduces some of the detail in the bay windows on the facade that's set back, effectively the background of these two foreground elements, masonry foreground elements. At the top of the building, we even developed, as we've been through all of these processes, a diminished facade. Ultimately, the top of the building recedes from its space. So here out along the street, here on the south side, we kind of reach out with the fenestration. We set back with the masonry, and then the background with it is all designed to recede as it touches the sky. Next slide, please. The composition of the two masonry elements creates a fun little courtyard. This courtyard is meant to be inhabited over time. You want to enter and exit from the retail entrances of the masonry, but we want people along St. Andrews to live and participate in the space of this courtyard. So within this courtyard, we've separated things and introduced a much softer material in the wood. It's either wood, it's oiled, it's meant to weather. But it's meant to occupy that space where we ask people to spend time with our project. This is now a good opportunity to talk about a couple of materials. I was talking about the masonry and what's happening with the masonry. We're using one masonry color, but you'll notice in some of the renderings, you see two different shades in that masonry. The brick stays the same. So we're using a general scale brick. We're using an engineered size, and of course, is 16 inches every 5 courses. We're purposefully scaling it up. We're not using necessarily an oversized brick, but we're purposefully scaling up the brick for this building. This is the color is kind of hard to see, it's a little lighter than this in reality. The darker section where you see the base of the building and we rendered a little bit darker and or window heads, the soldier courses. We're using dark mortar color to simply change the appearance of the thing in those areas to really mimic or be more akin to the darker kind of flex that are within this. Almost certainly. Again, the wood in this area is a sapele. We find it oil it and let it weather. We want it to be part of the background experience in the courtyard. And additionally, what you see for glazing here along St. Andrews and in the commercial spaces isn't storefront. We're doing that all out of a ground window. We're doing that so that we can pan the window, create that profiles around the edges, but also create smaller divisions and subdivisions within that space. So you look at the elevations, particularly in the wood area, we get all of the profile out of this project, not the storefront. Next slide, please. Here's a little bit more detail on that. You can see the composition of different parts in the large elevation on the left-hand side. See the masonry. I will point out, we don't bring the wood. We don't bring the wood to the ground. We set it up slightly so that it doesn't stain and transfer some of the things that might happen on the ground. We're deliberate with that. We're purposeful with that. You can see the subdivision of the windows, particularly in the courtyard space. You'll see a view of the additional siding details on the rest of the building coming up. The wall section in the middle will be compressed, so the perfect depiction of the profile does show the eroded center that further set back and creates space within that courtyard. Next slide, please, David. Moving to the corner. So I described how we were bringing the depth of the facade out in this kind of character of profile on a smaller two-story element. Here we have the primary corner, the arrival to the side along Chase Street, where we expect most of the vehicular traffic to be in. Frankly, the activity that's not in the courtyard, large part of that activity going around this space. So we have exaggerated, and I'll say the inverse of the extension, the depth of this facade. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And a couple of key points that I recall some of our early conceptualization of this. When you create that much depth and that much masonry, it has a tendency to get heavy. So in a bit of playfulness and to reduce some of the weight of that facade, you'll notice that these openings are splayed. So we use the same punch window size here in this larger element as we did in the two-story element on the opposite hand. We've just reduced the overall base plane of the masonry by splaying that opening open. We do that at the ground, and we do that at all of this upper level windows. When we detail that, we've been careful to detail the difference between the portion of the wall that is splayed, the portion of the wall that is returned perpendicular to the face. There was some conversation in the last meeting about being honest about where things were. I think there was some confusion about what was intended to be masonry and what was not intended to be masonry. So hopefully in this detail, you can see where the splayed portion of the window return is aluminum. We think just like the aluminum with the extended facade, those return back to the windows. If you look at the retail head and or the perpendicular facade returns, those are all done in masonry and return into the opening. So again, when I kind of beat the clarity home here, if that main retail opening that you see in the vignette, the right-hand side of it, perpendicular to the front face, returns as masonry, and so does its head. The opposite, or the left-hand side of that retail opening, is splayed. It is splayed in aluminum. If you look at one of the punched openings above, both the left jamb and the window head are splayed. Both of those are finished in aluminum. On the right-hand side, where the masonry returns square, it returns as masonry. This creates a unique effect. If you go back a slide, David, we appreciate it. You look in this rendering at the left-hand side and the right-hand side. We set up some rules about where we would return square and where we would allow the building to return splayed. On the left-hand side, everything looks rendered dark to match the metal. That's because from this vantage point, all you're seeing are aluminum splayed returns. On the right-hand side, all you see are masonry returns, where that masonry returns square to the base of the building. I think it's going to have a really wonderful dynamic and kind of those intellectual questions of the legibility of this facade, but it was extremely powerful in reducing the overall mass of this facade and creating a much more higher quality presentation of people's space as it is built. David, 2 more slides forward. Absolutely. It is aluminum too. It is aluminum too. It's not intended to be part of the display per se. We're trying to keep it really shallow, almost imperceptible, but returning that masonry in the horizontal condition is much cleaner. Quite frankly, to know it's sloped, it follows the same rules as on other sides. It just does not maintain the same kind of, we're not trying to drop the facade or drop the sill in an exaggerated way, like we have at the top of the side.
Thank you.
The masonry form, ultimately the 2-story form that turns the corner here, enters the site a little bit down Shade Street and starts to present what is probably the primary public entrance to what's happening on the ground here. Next slide. This exaggerated bay window marks that entrance, but it's also set as intended to be a very pedestrian and public space. It transitions from one more moment of wood over to the rhythm of the residential facades down Shade Street. If you look at the large elevation on the left-hand side, you'll see that exaggerated aluminum bay window set off of the battened board presentation of the wood on the left-hand side. So, and then you kind of see the depth of that, how we're carrying the house. The cornice of this element does not follow the finished intent of the other facade. We'll see more of that as we move down Shade Street. I'm going to transition now to John and let him talk about what's happening along the ground on St. Andrews.
Thanks. John Williams with Thomas and Hutton. David, if you could jump back to 1.1.
Is there a letter in front of that?
1.1.
Oh, sure. Let's see. I think was it this way? I don't remember. Is it
Keep going back.
Along St. Andrews, nothing's changed. We're still showing a 10-foot wide sidewalk with a 4-foot wide verge. The hardscape along the front has been further developed. We're proposing a battery grade paver along the base of the building, to kind of help transition the building into the ground plane. I think this is a real thoughtful detail that will kind of create some cohesiveness between what's happening vertically and what we're doing horizontally. And then that would spill into the plaza space, where there'd be 4 palms there, giving a little bit of a ceiling. I think that'd be a very, intimate, comfortable look where people will spill out with some cafe tables and chairs. The pavers are continued and wrapped around the building, kind of responding to how the building, there's a little bump to it, it's not symmetrical. So as the building kind of jogs in and out, the pavers will be that continuous edge that will transition the building into the ground plane. As you turn the corner on the Chase Street, we're infilling the pavers, to maintain that hierarchy. This pavers will also be used as the pedestrian crosswalk that will take people into the entrance off Chase Street right there. And then with the pavers, we're proposing a salt finish concrete. And then regarding the landscaping within this area, within the verge, we're still proposing high-rise live oaks along St. Andrews, and then we're pulling down Chase Street too, so we want to create some streetscape.
David, A311. So pick up at Chase Street here. Chase Street transitions from the commercial frontage of St. Andrews into the more residential primary use of this building. That transition occurs over time. I mentioned a moment ago that signature entrance element is we expect a large portion of our guests or visitors to the space to come in the parking lot, walk across that space that John just talked about, and arrive at that front door. But that bay window moves over to this rhythm of facades that we then develop down the building. There's a series of 3 images of the parking structure, and there's 4 more, so the vocabulary moves down to the park. Slide A345. This perspective, this perspective gives you a glimpse of the detail that is occurring both in the landscape space and in what is the extension of the residential units out into the public space, the public realm. And we've done that by recessing and creating a little alcove, creating protected space within the buildings for those residents, as well as a little bit of a second level. Let's go to the next slide. In section, you can see that space and what's happening inside that space, and the depth that gives the facade and the protected space for the residents who live at this plaza. We do also start to introduce more of the cementitious vocabulary. We'll see more details on that in a minute. In this portion of the facade, so the primary facade, the primary material of the facade remains brick, that top story, and then the diminished corners transition to be cementitious, and we'll see more detail on that. Next slide, please. We reintroduced the vocabulary of the deep facade from the Chase and St. Andrews corner to what would be the primary residential entrance to the building. Column plan, those references can have the first run of the building, A void, and then it's the parking structure, and then the second version of the building that moves down to the park. So we use that vocabulary in the corner to mark this. So we're going to talk in more detail about the garage screening and the detailing of the garage, and a little bit deeper into the presentation. But this is a generous space. It's been purposefully designed to be back away from the face of the building, and purposefully designed to create space at the ground in that transition. So I'll talk about that. Now, perfect. Sorry.
Didn't know where you're going now.
I was trying to think about another slide. Go.
Yeah, David, you can jump over to L 1.2, please.
Let's make these so far apart. I'm sorry, repeat that.
L 1.2. So the last time we were in front of the board, I think some very good comments were made. We further developed and studied the hardscape within this area. I think it's been a couple of things. We used two different kind of paving patterns and also delineated the pedestrian and vehicular travel ways to create some visual separation between, pedestrian and vehicular travel. But this is also, this is the entrance into the garage. This is also the entrance into the main clubhouse. So, we're trying to treat it as more of an entry plaza. So a couple of things that we've done here is we've introduced columns to serve as bollards. We think this will help kind of bring down the scale of the opening. Another thing that was a good comment that was presented last time was we continued the pavers into the garage. And so I think that's going to carry them further. So you're not going to have a material change that's being delineated by the actual entrance into the garage. So I think there's been some thoughtful details that have been further developed here that I think will really enhance the experience that someone will have, whether it's vehicular or pedestrian coming into the center.
Which is, yeah, let's sorry, let's keep it till the end if that's okay.
May I just have very quickly, doesn't pavers terminate where you're showing?
Where's showing?
They terminate at this location?
Yes.
Okay, so they don't go any further.
No, well, yeah, the heavy black line, that's the garage opening. And we carried it all the way in the lines of the entrance.
Thank you.
14 more minutes. All right. Slide, I'm just going to jump to slide 347. And please. So as we move down Chase Street, we ultimately arrive at the park. We developed a vocabulary appropriate for the park as well as the residential. There were a number of questions asked by the board in the last presentation about some of the details, particularly of the porch elements. And we have spent a considerable amount of time refining that. And in a way, our approach has evolved from the way I had described it previously to be more about how we put the pieces of parts together. Next slide. So in these details, you will see not only the masonry detailing, but you'll also see the connection details for the individual storage elements and the pieces. So we'll point out how the connections are made. We don't have 30-foot tall columns. Those columns are broken and put into segments, and that is detailed with specific type of connection. That connection is going to the balcony in a very way, all the way to the underside of the porch. So, wanted to point that out. It's an evolution of thinking, and we really like how this has come together and made a very human carved interaction between its assembly, purposeful assembly, and the occupants of that space. Next slide. As we move into the residential courtyard, this is our primary material changes from that of being masonry to that of being cementitious. It's a little bit lighter material, a little bit more finesse to it inside of the space. But we do maintain the vocabulary of those porches as they move through the depth of the courtyard and return back to the Next slide. There were some questions, and we'll see, actually go 2 more slides. Here we go. So there were some questions in the last meeting about this detail and how these details, both in the siding and in the windows, were enacted. We're not profiling the window in a conventional flat trim. We're doing it with a narrow profile, and we're carrying the jam profile vertically to the full extent of the facade. So this horizontal siding breaks at all of these lines in a very specific way, and that line carries of the penetration all the way up to the diminished cornice. So on the right-hand side, you'll see some of our details of how we work with that narrow line to create another layer of rhythm and a fairly unique detail to this project. Next slide. These are additional masonry details. That vertical line that the little shadow we're creating also presents itself in the way we turn corners in the siding. You see that in the detail on the upper right hand side. John, would you like to talk about the courtyard?
Yeah. Jumping back to.
1.4.
Yes.
1.4.
So tonight we brought a sample, the screen wall, full barrier fence, that we called out. We brought a sample of it tonight. One of the items that we're asking the board to reconsider, is the use of artificial turf within the courtyard space. We removed it from the other courtyard spaces on the project. It is a tight space. We feel like it is an appropriate use for artificial turf. With the screen wall, it won't be visible from Park Street. However, if the board feels like it's still not an appropriate material, we've called out an alternate material, no sheet, 2.3 that we would use in its place if you still feel like it's not an appropriate material. The screen wall fence is a dark aluminum fence that ties in with the cantilever pavilion that's adjacent to it. One reason why we're recommending or proposing an aluminum fence is just because it is a full barrier, and over time maintenance, you won't have those issues or concerns of sometimes here with floors or walls and edges and things like that. So. Yes, the other courtyard, yeah, if you click over, probably one more sheet.
Sorry. This one?
When you go back.
Oh, there we go. You're talking about the front courtyard?
No, the courtyard towards the neighborhood.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So. Next slide.
Artificial turf has been removed from this courtyard. This is the present papers here where we spill out from the residential units for people to come sit and lounge. There's a pedestrian path connection to the park space. And then there's a bridge that is being proposed. And then the bridge is to serve cell tower access.
It's good at 3.0. So we're down to the last part of the project. I wanted to point out a couple of relationships, particularly to the parking structure. Got into a little bit of discussion. I want to make sure we understand what we see from where. There's actually a tremendous amount of existing vegetation along the transition from what is the back of Max One and the bridal shop into the neighborhood. It conceals the project pretty well from the street proper. And I'm pointing that out because we've included a couple of perspectives, and we're going to show you one that purposely tries to get you the best of them, both of the view of the garage structure. So we talk about that detail. So that view you'll see in a moment is taken from St. Andrews, kind of looking over Max One and not obscured by the vegetation that we're leaving along the south edge of the site. It's also important to note in this plan that where the residential backs up the project is residential. And so that the area of the exposed parking structure is the area that's adjacent to the commercial, not the area that's adjacent to the residential. If you move to slide A351 please. This is the perspective I was referring to, that it looks over the top of Max One and gives you a broader view of that side of the parking structure. So this view, and it's very similar to the views we've looked at previously, but it's really out here from the street where we would see this beginning the first couple of days of the parking structure. If you go to the next slide, what ends up happening is you start to get into the neighborhood, and that run of vegetation that comes down the property line starts to appear. So just eyes wide open about where we want to see this from, and some of the design things we're going to talk about here in a moment. That said, let's go to 351C. Included a handful of case studies. Some of this came up in the last presentation, and although I'm not 100% sure that the tech center garage is the one that just has been referencing, I wanted to show you two examples. So the top left picture is a project called Twin. That project uses the same fabric structure, fabric and structural approach that we're proposing for this particular project. So it's composite fabric. We can vary the colors, textures, the amount of transparency to it. Their application is a little bit different, but it is the same product. In the lower left-hand corner, you can see that garage, the photo taken now. The center bottom and center right-hand photos of the tech center garage on the street side. Their approach utilized a perforated metal. But I think what I want to point out most importantly, David, can you zoom in on the middle bottom picture on the right hand kind of side of that? In the way they constructed their garage, the spandrel panel of the garage stops the floor line, which inherently exposes the vehicular headlights. In our configuration, we're following what was done in the Twin, and you get that spandrel panel to effectively 42 inches. That is my pickup truck, not small, with all the lights on it to try to show you how we expect that to occur within the garage. We'll also point out that the orientation of the ramp in the parking structure is parallel to the facade. So headlights going up and down the ramp should not, we don't believe they will go over the top, or they will all stay below that 42-inch wide. There are a couple other lessons learned from these structures. We might get into some of those details in a bit, but I think it's important to see these case study images and understand what we're proposing and how what we're proposing has been implemented in a somewhat similar way. In slide A313, please.
I'm sorry, 313.
Yes.
Oops, sorry.
Forward. In the lower left hand, yes, so the bottom elevation here is the elevation of the parking garage from St. Andrews on the right to where it returns and turns into residential. So we have these 4 panels of the fabric set into the structure of the garage. We've been deliberate about the rhythm of this and creating depth. As the garage will be seen, as you saw in that perspective, as an oblique angle, we want the depth of that structure to help conceal what's happening inside of that garage as well. Slide A351. There we go. So here's a couple of sections and some details of that garage screen. You can see the depth of the structure related to the spandrel panel that we were looking at a photo on a moment ago. The lid structure, the additional structure for the fabric is suspended from it. We continue to be intrigued by the idea of utilizing this fabric in a fairly creative way. It can be printed on and create a real statement. We see these moments of excitement and artistry within some of the adjacent neighborhoods. I'm not sure it's appropriate to be disallowed at this location. If you go back a slide, David. 2 slides. There we go. You can see in that picture in the bottom right-hand corner, I think there's an opportunity to do something creative related to the community and maybe do it in a more subtle way. We still have to work on the program for that. But I'm very excited about the opportunity to use it effectively, and to do something maybe a little unexpected in a place where we believe it is appropriate. 37 seconds long, but I think this is the end of what I wanted to make sure we communicated to the board. I'm sure there were plenty of other questions. We've invested ourselves in detailing this project to the fullest intent of the design. We're excited about it, and we look forward to working with you to make it a reality.
Thank you. Questions?
I just had a quick one. It was on page C4.1.
I hope I'm going the right direction.
It's gonna be near the front. Yeah, keep going back. There you go.
Okay, so your bridge structure is shown this way here, and then we get to the L. L1. And on the landscape, it's shown as a much larger structure or whatever it is. I'm just trying to figure out between the two, what is it, what are we doing there?
Yeah, so the bridge structure on L1.3 is what we're going with, and that's also shown on the S2.0 sheets.
Okay.
With the plan profile.
Is that being used solely for the cell phone tower access, or is that also part of the fire access plan?
So it will not take any fire trucks, but that's for, they want to walk across to get to the building.
Okay. Are you done with your questions, Amy, before going to mine? I believe the last meeting, there was still some unresolved items regarding the fire access plan. Has that been resolved with the city fire? Okay. I don't recall if this was resolved at the last meeting or not, but SCDOT's approval or at least preliminary feedback on trees in the right of way.
So we are working with them on their recent metals. They haven't made any comments on it now. We're just looking for that problem.
I think that was all. I did see, and I saw it in a comment as well, that the sidewalk appears to have narrowed in one area on St. Andrews. There's a dimension shown less than 10 feet.
That was on the
I saw
C,
David's comments
the
as
C
well.
site plan.
Wasn't it the staking? plan?
I can't remember with the sheet number, but it was one of your, I think it was the architectural site plan. Is that, or was that a civil? Yeah, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. Yeah, I think it was this one.
Someone showing the, maybe the speaking thing. Yes.
Yeah, right here. I mean, just slightly, but it's,
Don, I think, um, no, it's a couple inches less, but the verge is a couple inches wider than 4 feet. So this is, I think, just more of a drafting area where we can still maintain a 4-foot verge and have a continuous 10 feet of sidewalk across the front.
okay.
Those are all of my questions.
A quick question, can you get it out? I just see it. So, in this area, what is I noticed there aren't like bed lines around the proposed planting. What's the ground treatment there? Is it going to be seeded? Is it a whole mulch bed? I know it's a swale there, but I'm just curious. Because,
So those are all buffer planters and buffer plantings in there. And so, in there, I mean, there's gonna have to be a lot of bill adjustment to get it to work. That's a very good question. I think it will probably end up being more of just not as defined deadline, just because as we're transitioning into that existing vegetation, we're gonna have to kind of marry the two and blend the two. But that's a good comment that we need to flush out.
Thank you. Excellent. I think there's something more than water in that bottle for you.
Not yet.
Can you go back? I don't really know what page that on. Page 351. This is the imagery of the inspiration of the spring. There's, is it the intent to still do the screening of the day, or is the intent to just leave the screening simple in terms of no part of it?
Oh, I see. So none of these examples are a large scale installation of a graphic. We like the idea of embedding a graphic. I think it's important kind of nod to some of the flavor of what's happening. But I don't think it has to be loud.
Like that.
You don't need to hear it, but I mean, there's something nice about, and you gotta figure out the best way to explore this.
No, do the one side.
Do what?
Still do the one side.
Yeah, it would be one side.
So one of the nice things about referencing having that section is how the graphics change. Do you anticipate that the graphics that would be placed on the screen would be?
No, I think they're pretty firm.
Does that concern you? Because these things do date and age, and there's something.
But we hope it makes it 50 years so we won't everybody know that.
Can I ask you about the point for one? Sure. And looking at the imagery on, now that's David, if I may, we would go back to 351C. If you could blow into that bottom left image from the lighting, of course, one of the things that I know that you've addressed in the past and that we've asked about is dealing with the light filtration outside of the garage is.
So the ground level is twin. I haven't been able to architect. The ground level of the grid had a little bit different intent for it, and it's absolutely right here. But that's an extension of that public park space that is purposefully eliminated off this forward. So, the rest of the garage is done with cut-off fixture recessed in the pockets on both sensors, which is what gives the upper level of the back block the ability to be built. It's not that, but now we haven't really photometrics for the garage in here. We're pretty good to manage what will be the exploitation of that. This is kind of a fun case study because that line is intended to be raw, and what we're trying to do.
And the point you were making regarding the difference between the plans and the Charleston text. Can you eliminate?
So it really has to do with the configuration of spandrel on the outside. Zoom in a little more big.
In terms of not seeing the.
Right. So if you zoom in a little more and look at that, you know, I think they were trying to stand right. The other picture.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Right there. So they stopped that spandrel floor and used a cable for the 42 inches above that. It does there is a small piece of spandrel in there, but I should draw a picture. The headlights on my truck, one is above that spandrel and the other set are below that spandrel. So all the lights on the front of my truck is coming out of that truck.
This is still questions. Are we still in question?
Yes, we are.
Nathan, you had mentioned you were bringing a sample of the knotwood fence.
He's got it.
Yeah.
That is this.
Oh, okay.
This-
So you
this
did.
is not.
Yeah.
KNOT wood.
Gotcha. Okay. You did. I didn't catch that. Gotcha.
These are fully yes. Is it? Classically black, kind of that we consider of it. And it's a boil that was here.
We can't get, it's a supply issue. I'm trying to get profiles or certain thicknesses. And you kind of can't default to hardy and the artisan stuff is.
But it's thin lap everywhere, and then they trim it for.
Yes. I believe that is.
No, the photo shows like a ship property. I forgot that's not your.
That's, no, it is, just a minute. Give me a minute on that. Yeah, absolutely.
A329, that there could be a fence that completely encircles the crossing.
Yes, that's, there's some of the two-rail fence. That's the existing two-rail fence that runs along, it's on Stone Park property.
Okay. So that is not on this property.
Correct.
The nickel gap products you use for all that recess portion of the same. There's only on the residential portion of the courtyard and around the park side. Where we use conventional wrap.
So, David,
I'm sorry.
That shows kind of a zoomed in of the one residential nook. I think it's off Chase Street. And it's got the, second floor terrace, all lap, or is it more parts of that? So I think
Can you guys direct me to sheet number? Do you remember where that is? Is it this one?
that.
Yeah.
So that's all the same, and then where that's all lap inside of it.
And that is the nickel gap. All of that inside there is also the nickel gap, the same as what's out on CNA. So it's just in the above the base at the part and into the courtyard we introduce all of that. So that part up there is dimensional lap, this part down here. See the gap.
And one more slide. Certainly. So we have the rotated window trim, the kind of battens that follow and back all the way out. And then at the, it's like the top level, we have that kind of inverted W quarter trim. We have the two battens and then the last stuff. I think that was just at the top. For the rest of the party volumes, is it just a conventional quarter trim for the exterior quarter?
Yeah, so go 4 slides ahead, maybe. 5 slides ahead. So, for instance, behind the tree there, where that party comes down, like the outside corner of the top, that outside corner on the right hand side of the part should have the same detail. That, yeah, the W is a fairly described. But what's happening here is the vocabulary is top story, effectively coming down second story.
In the cylinder kind of the same depth like those.
This still a little bit, this has a profile, but the head is the same. The face of the seal is the same, it's just a change design.
You have no questions with this? I have one, Nathan, and I'm sure it's in the drawing somewhere, but the pictures on the top level of the garage, G1 and G2, which are the pictures are those?
You want me to go to that sheet?
Or I'm sure it's in here, I just couldn't find where it was defined.
Maybe I can run through this a little bit differently, Erica. So on E616, the last sheet, all well.
I saw-
Last sheet, that one right there. So I think this might be what you're looking for. These are all wall mounted fixtures.
yeah.
So there's nothing elevated above the fact.
There's no
that
pole fixture.
No, there are no pole fixtures. That's why there's 7 million little light fixtures around the perimeter of this thing.
Yes.
That's about rounding out. Give or take.
And you said the bricks is all the same brick except just that the cylinders was kind of sky different.
And with the base, so there's kind of a water table on the brick. That base, which changes a little bit around the building, uses that same darker mortar color. Changing the brick seems silly.
And then on the parking screen, it stops a story shy of the ground. Is there This is just, is there a specific reason that it stops and doesn't come in front of that last?
There's that vegetation on that and what we held a continuous line, that side slopes. But to try to guide the transition from what is landscape and what the facade itself.
Any additional questions? We are now in public comment period. David, I believe we had only one for this project submitted from Ms. Donna Jacobs. Is there anyone else?
That was it.
Okay. The board received it and everyone who's read it. Thank you for submitting that. Eric, do you want to start?
Sure, thank you. Eric Coleman, West Actually Coordinator for City of Charleston. So I'm gonna go at a few different things here. So number one, just the background of this project again. For those who may have not been sitting since this began during 2020 for board review. They did come to the West Actually Commission to review it with both the full commission as well as a smaller work group before that. But this project actually goes back to about 2015, 2016, when the Grambling partners had first purchased property and we're working with the city on what's the best way to redevelop this location. This is one of the priority redevelopment areas in Plan West Ashley, one that we actually did not put a illustrative image in there because we were already working with them on what form and how to redevelop this. So that's just, you know, the nickel and dime background on it. I did want to also say that on Thursday, we did reach out to the neighborhood presidents in the area along with Charleston Moves for a pre-comment period for these guys. I see Bridget and Ms. Higgins are here along with Kenneth Meralda, so I'll let them talk. Ms. Lucier and Ms. Higgins were not able to join us for that meeting, so it was just Kenneth Meralda and Katie Zimmerman representing Charleston Moves. Katie asked about the front area being a multi-use trail along St. Andrews. It is designed at 6 to 10 feet, but not labeled as multi-use trail in this location. She also had questions about the bridge being relocated. There's currently a wooden pedestrian bridge that connects the backside of Ryan's over to next one. And so this new concrete bridge, she asked if that was going to also be looked at as a pedestrian connection, which that's something that would need to be discussed with the Avondale residents to make sure that they approve it. But it's definitely something the city would encourage, is having additional pedestrian connections around the area. And then in addition to that, this project is looking like it's setting up the rest of the site for some fantastic development after this first phase. So I'm looking forward to working with you all along with Grambling on the second part whenever that starts coming along.
Thank you, Eric. Any others for public comment?
Good evening. My name is Marcia Higgins, and I am president of the Maryville Ashley Building Organization. My remarks today are in reference to Sycamore Avenue being completely ignored in the design of this project. And when it was a wonderful presentation, and when it was presented, they talked about Chase Street. They spoke about the park, which is Acronym Park, of course, St. Andrews Boulevard, and Avondale, but said nothing about St. Andrews Boulevard. St. Andrews Boulevard,
Sycamore.
Sycamore Avenue. Sycamore Avenue runs, intersects St. Andrews Boulevard. It's on the opposite side of the Chase Street. So it was there, but it's completely ignored. And seems as if the developers would try to connect with Sycamore Avenue. because it is a significant factor in terms of this development. We quite understand that your board does not address traffic issues. However, the impact of this development on Sycamore Avenue could be significant because it's not connected, it's not included in the design. So our concern is Sycamore Avenue is not even included in the design, in the planning for this development. We've discussed it in our neighborhood association. We love the fact that the area is being developed. It's a nice city. It is. However, we're not willing to sacrifice our community for that at this point because of not being included. And we talk about Sycamore, our community, actually, really, it's only, we have Sycamore Avenue on that side, and we have Sycamore right next to the area that's being developed. It's between this property and the post office. So we would like to see that the developers include Sycamore Avenue in their plan in terms of how will the residents who reside in this apartment complex enter and exit from Sycamore. And we think it is very important.
Sure, and I appreciate your comments very much. Unfortunately, traffic is not in our purview of the board. I don't know if you've spoken with David or with Eric before, but they can direct you to the correct contact for traffic.
Isn't that something that would also be addressed during phase 2?
I would assume so, but, and I'll let the applicant team respond during their commentary back.
And I would appreciate if they would respond.
Okay.
Because it is a part of the design. Chase Street is, the park is, Avondale is, all of that surrounds this development. So why not address Sycamore? So that's my point. And because of that being ignored, at this point, we're not comfortable in asking for approval for this project at 18. For that main fact, they completely ignore that important part of the community.
Thank you.
So my name is Bridget Lucier, and I'm the president of my monument, which is immediately adjacent on the other side of Sycamore from this property. And we have been chatting since 2015, 2016, something like that, about this project. And I also would like to see the property redeveloped. It's been a long time coming. What has brought me here today are a couple of things. One is that since we first saw the design in 2020, there has been only microscopic changes in the overall layout. And you are like the Shakespeare of architects over here, and it's lovely to listen to you talk, and it's lovely to look at all the plans that are planned, and I think that that's great, and that is really the purview. Ultimately, there are one thing that really just gets me about this project is that it builds out every single square foot of the property that is possible. And it leaves nothing at all for the residents of those future properties, the 230 households that will be there to go to other than the public park, which is already fully utilized. We're there all the time. It's the only soccer playing field in the statue area. It is maxed out already. The dog park is maxed out. The whole place is already fully utilized. So to bring 230 new households into this location and to build every square inch of the property so that they have nowhere to walk their little dogs or just pick flower or smell grass or the turf, or the case may be, just seems to be on this quite green and quite short-sighted. And if you let everybody do this with their property, think of what this will look like, what West Ashley will look like. And I'd also like to explain that the reason I moved to West Ashley from downtown is very crowded, downtown is very urban. And to apply these urban design principles to an area that is fundamentally suburban and known for tree-lined streets, big lots, lots of shade, beautiful, small, cute little bungalow homes. This is immense. This is a huge, huge, huge project. And I know that you've done a lot of work and really done your best to make it look as good as it can for something that takes up every square inch of property and relies on the public domain for its green space, which I don't think is a good idea. It's good precedent. Speaking of precedents, when the extra space storage was built across the street, the city wrung its hands and were powerless to do anything about this monstrosity. If this was in the city, this would never have happened. Well, now we are 2 years down the road, right across the street, we've got something that does not look like an extra space storage, but it certainly is nice. So it's just interesting. So a couple of specific things that I thought about, and the biggest thing that jumped out at me, I have not looked closely at this since the July meeting. The biggest thing that jumped out at me is all along, it's been 829 St. Andrews. We're talking about just this one person, just this one. Could you pop up a burial possibly so that I can just kind of go through and talk about it? So we've just been talking about 829 St. Andrews, as the Lions property, the parking lot, and some of the road mission boards are parked. So this is just kind of this little thin sliver. Well, surprise, surprise, looking at the signal.
Did you guys have an aerial?
There is one.
The new title is 65 Sycamore. And I thought, are they talking about this? The 65 Sycamore, that's the CBS one. And then I started looking at the parking and saw that the parking equations, which I believe are parking in the new program, the density parking requirement
It is not.
Okay, well, then I'll skip that, but suffice to say that the new drawings show the parking lot that's adjacent is satisfying the parking needs of the building, which is interesting because I was under the impression that whole property was going to be redeveloped to do something else. So I'll leave that there. So very urban projects in suburban area. Not loving the comparison with the building that is on the same side of the road as the King Morgan Coal Terminal. For comparison's sake, up in Algonquin, that's something that flies up by the coal terminal and something that flies in suburban West Ashley. Those are two different binoculars. And so right up to the property line, the vault stormwater. I don't know if that's something that you guys are addressing, but that's been an issue all along. This is in the flood zone, meaning that the groundwater is already at or near the level of the ground. So when you put water underwater, it doesn't compress, it just pushes that water out. So that's
Sorry to be a broken record. That's not our purview
okay.
either.
All right, I'll leave that. Something that is in your purview and it's noted on the drawings, the actual top of the little elevator pouch that goes to the top goes all the way up to almost 58 feet. The cap is 55. So it's about the trees. And finally, parking, purview, 3 feet, 5 flood zone, yes. And then finally, the trees. I was kind of surprised that we were planning on using a modified version of the live oak on that street because I don't think it's going to be wide enough. And the issue that raises this is you can see this is from the corner of Emily and St. So this is what live oak looks like when it's along a building that goes almost all the way up to the so I'm talking about these trees right here. So you see how they're right in this little verge right here. So that verge is a 4-foot verge, just like what we're talking about. And those trees are all gone right now. They kept bumping into the building. That's what they do. They grow. The Quercus virginiana high-rise variety has a 40-foot canopy width. So if you have a 10-foot sidewalk and then a 4-foot verge, and you've got a tree that will grow 40 feet, all these trees have to be chopped by the one. And can't blame them, really. So I for you think a different tree for the birch, because I don't think that I don't, it's going to be a tree. Keep off the two wide, so don't be a tree building, and then nobody's happy, and then this could chop down. And the other concerns that our neighborhood had primarily, it's just using up that whole thing. It's going to, I know you're not dealing with the access on and off the Sycamore, but if Whole Foods has its own light, this project deserves its own light. Okay, there is no way any of these construction trucks are going to be driving to and from that property, pulling on to taking a left on St. Andrew's Boulevard. It's just not going to happen. They're going to come over to Sycamore. They're going to.
Sorry, traffic's not
Yeah,
very.
but just keep it in mind, it's gonna be very, very, very messy. But overall, I like what I see. I'm also interested in, is there a rooftop bar or not? It looks like there still is. Is that something that's part of this design? Anyone?
They'll have time after all the public
Okay.
comments to answer any questions or
All right.
respond.
So I think that about covers it, just kind of a ramble, but I'm just a little concerned about the way it's just built out right to the edge. Which is things like that much. And they're relying on public space adjacent to certain. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Evening, again, President of Avondale Civic Club. I've given my comments to the developer several times, several meetings that we've had, but there are four main ones that are mentioned tonight. One is the bridge that goes behind next one. My neighborhood is very concerned with the two residential houses behind next one along Avondale Avenue. We're going to be demolished as part of this process. So I do want to spend them to come up with a solution that does not seek to demolish those two homes. The second is the lights. Another concern was that lights in the parking garage are going to fly on Avondale Avenue and some homes. So I am glad to see that it doesn't want to solution like that. Third is the walkway along Boulevard. That's been a discussion that we've had several times. And I am glad to see that it's designated as, I guess it's 10 feet. There was discussion about a multi-use path. I don't think there's any comment extensively on that. I'm just glad to see it is going to be a rather wide sidewalk. I do believe that this is the place for density. I share the concerns about Sycamore, although I think that particular concern will have to be addressed in the next phase of this. And I will be watching the next phase pretty closely and hopefully. So, pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I wouldn't want for preliminary approval, not that. Anyway, a couple of thoughts.
State your name for the record.
James Ward. I live right next to the Cockwood. And I've commented before about this. And I think that there's been a lot of study done here. And I commend everybody on the work there. And I think it's a great idea to have it developed. Couple of detail points. I agree about the live oaks, even though these are high-rise live oaks. They do have a history of expanding and doing follow. I think there was some planted at the corner of Chapel in East Bay. Gosh, about 15 years ago or so. For that office building there, and you can go see what they look like after the biggest one. One of the other issues in terms of traffic getting, I should say, designation within this area in the roads, is it's not clear to me from the drawing I saw how the crosswalk even working across that little road, Chase Road there. It looks like it's entirely brick. I don't see how that 10-foot sidewalk gets across that street, much less the Sycamore in the road. So there seems to be some designation issues there. And then lastly, just looking at the facade, I was a little overwhelmed by the eloquence of the architect. But at the end of the day, I think we're talking about a building of mass and of detail that's, on my mind at least, without the aluminum panel, similar to the Simmons building on St. Philip's, the way one side is doubled and the other side squared, and it gives a really massive look to the front of it. And I'm not sure, I mean, I don't want it to be transparent, I want it to be overly light. That does seem almost bunker-like, and maybe the detailing when the felt for it couldn't quite follow how that would work, and I'm not sure how he could either, because all he felt was rather black and white working going.
So maybe to some extent, sort of working drawing pigmentation really needs to have a little bit more participants to really get a sense of those elements. That you define. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Jacobs, first down, so I'm not gonna read my comments and just want to thank them for all the detail that they put into the architecture of the building. It's improving every time it comes to y'all. One thing I just want to definitely make sure, if we don't really see detail on the landscape, on the land, where we're going to service the building, the commercial trucks, deliveries, because if we don't, we're going to be sitting out in the suicide lane and saying, use one part, or we're going to be sitting in the parking lot, which was going to be ultimately designed, and still in all of this detail, never saw detail in that. I can preliminary approval is great. Let's ask them for that detail. To make sure that service trucks don't be an issue. Because there's so much of that already. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Public comment period is closed. David, staff recommendations. please.
Thank you. Staff comment number one, the site plan needs to reflect a 10-foot minimum sidewalk. You all did reflect that, but just I wanted to reiterate that it needs to be shown and maintain a 10-foot sidewalk on the front along St. Andrews. I'm scratching comment number two because they addressed the knotwood sample. I'm also scratching number three because they addressed the pavers in the entry of the garage and telling us where they're going to stop. Number four, incorporate the intermediate column at the garage entry. This has been a long-standing DRB practice requirement. This reduces the scale of it. I'm also scratching number five because they did address the screen images. Number six, south elevation, sheet A313. The concrete under the garage elevation is unresolved and is a substandard product in relation to the other materials. This is B of number six. The cantilevered portion of the living units is a little awkward still. Left of the cantilevered brick wood siding seems to be forced. Material transitions do not make that much sense. Perhaps a hyphen of all wood makes more sense in this location. This is 6C. The elevation is highly visible from St. Andrews and was requested previously to be presented as a main priority perspective view into the site. It would be best to have a longer view away from the buildings. Please submit with final. I know you did mention the trees are blocking the view, but we try and not use trees as a screening, and if we could see a perspective without the trees, please. Number seven, proposed windows, ensure no single hung, looking for depth of frame and for best possible shadow lines. 7A, window detail shown in A345B and A349B. The window is set very close to the siding or facade. In the past, the DRB has required the windows to be set into the wall thickness as deep as possible. 7B, the nailing fin on the DRB projects has been set 2 inches or so on the interior side of the sheathing. This results in a more traditional shadow line from traditional windows. 7C, product data is provided in the last portion of the submittal. It implies that these windows are set very close to the finished facade, finished face of the wall, which will not provide a shadow line such as has been required of other DRB projects. Staff comment 8, verify cement board lap siding thickness. Pictures indicate thicker siding. Detail indicates thinner siding. Cut sheet provided indicates 5/16, but should be 5/8. Staff comment 9, the exposed wood detailing showed on 348A would be better if they were timbers and not built up 2x material. The material joints and hanger brackets for dimensional lumber would not finish properly. Staff comment 10, sheet A612, the light fixtures near the entrance of the garage are to be completely out of view. It would be best to change the light fixture to a more traditional lights rather than the overhead performance lights of traditional garage. 10A, Garage light fixtures are to be provided and lensed so that, I'm sorry, so as not to see the diodes. A staff comment 10B, lighting at garage needs to be full cutoff, LED and motion dimming detection. I think they did set in the comments that they will be motion sensor. 10D, the garage lighting plan is difficult to tell which lights are keyed to the product data provided. The applicant needs to take special consideration at the roof and at the perimeter.
Steve, sorry, we're gonna scratch 10C, correct?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I scratched 10C because they did address that already. That there's no poles on the roof. Staff comment 11. All traffic signs on the property are to have a decorative metal or wood post painted black, except for in the right of way. And that is it. We recommend a preliminary approval with the conditions noted. Because of the complexity and size of this project, staff recommends that the final document submissions come back before the board, just so we can verify that what we ask has been completed. The comments above speak to this request.
Thank you. Now's your time to respond and clarify to all the public comments and staff comments.
I'm going to keep it brief. There's been a lot of time invested by all parties as well as the community. We appreciate everybody's feedback and participation through this process. A lot of the comments aside tonight are technical in nature and complementary process we're working on with that. We'll see through the rest of the technical questions through that process. There's a tremendous amount of information in front of you. Staff have done a wonderful job on getting the leads on this detail. We're not quite at the finish line yet. Appreciate your support and feedback and look forward to getting all the way to it. So thank you.
You're in board discussion.
Oh, I'm sorry. I scratched 12 as well because they did. I decided I didn't want to recommend what I said. Yeah.
Addressing that, I would accept alternative payment. And it's I do think this matters.
Can you speak up a little for the
I was
recording?
just saying, I do think this high rise.
Oh, trees.
I just think that, I mean, they do. It was a great solution. And it's always sold as a great solution. This is really nice. It's all urban pavement in the courtyard and
Alternate pavement for the pool area, correct?
that's correct.
Actually, I'm not opposed to artificial turf here. I typically am when it's visible, but it doesn't bother me in this situation, and I'll probably surprise people by saying there's a time and a place, and I think this is a place where things can be acceptable.
I said before, I think that the architect has worked very closely with us since we've involved this, and we greatly appreciate that. And the complexity and significance of this project, and the fact that it's become a model for future projects can't go unsaid. Nathan and Steve is really invested in all of the time. Stressing this, particularly like the way that you begin to carve out those solids with those little entry points, which is really, as you were saying, going to be points of interest as this becomes an evolution. It's hard to see it in the plan, but the way that you described it, of course, seeing the elevation really helps out significantly. So thank you. I really had, I think staff covered it very well.
think stuff from it was the Kenny with entrance. Was that the entrance? And,
I think I said cantilevered,
the bay window.
yeah. That's, yeah, I think I was referring to something else. Where was that? You remember what's in the middle? Sorry.
I think he said it was south. Facade, or I look at the people, I don't know.
Cantilevered portion of the living units. Do you know?
One of the things you're laughing is kind of a nice surprise.
No, I wasn't talking about the bay window.
Okay.
Yeah, we like the bay window. I think I was referring to the back section of the building where all the porches are. But I guess you wouldn't call those cantilevered. I'll have to clarify that. I'm sorry.
Could we just see it now?
But well, to be perfectly honest, it came from Tori and I'm not sure. Yeah, yeah.
I don't have any comments. I'm the same. I'm from Public Turf. I actually lived in a community downtown that interior had turf, and it was actually a nice amenity because the kids played on it. So it was something that was nice. And it was internal, so you can have it outside. But I don't know.
Permission?
I was delighted to preliminary approval. With staff comment one. The four. I would say 6 ABC. 7 ABC. 8, 9. 10 AB, D. And 11. Annual board comments. May I ask for input in this regard from the landscape side? Artificial turf and not artificial turf.
I'm going to. I just.
Not a best in favor, I'm just talking about the. I agree.
I agree.
So that we use the favor. I'm sorry.
And they have a whole park with real. living. Well, it's still, I mean, I mean.
Sure.
I mean, we can discuss it now, or we can discuss it at the next meeting.
We'll defer. So that's the most.
Also, if you will, the business line, you're all very.
It's the library, yes.
So,
And also, just please provide clarity on some access and finances.
so no comment on the turf versus paver at this time?
I think we had 3 of us that were fine with either and Andy adamantly opposed.
We'll get it.
Yeah, I know I'm like regressing that in the future on another project. Yeah. I think it serves the purpose.
So I think then, sorry, Andy, the board is okay with the turf or the paper.
But I think the suggestion was to remain silent on that.
All right, so to repeat the motion, we have a motion for preliminary approval with staff comments 1, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, A, 10B, 10D, 11, along with board comments to study an alternative to the high-rise live oak and to provide clarity on the service entrance at the base middle. And are we also?
I'm sorry, and yes, it's a request. That the board see the policy.
Yeah, okay. And for the board to receive and review the final submission. Is there a second? Is any further discussion? I will call roll. Aaron?
Yes, in favor.
Yes. Stephanie? Yes, in favor. And I'm also yes in favor. We will move on to our last item, minutes, approval of minutes from the July 18th, 2022. Our second. Thank you, Aaron. For discussion. I'll roll, Tina.
Yes.
We good? Stephanie? And I am also in favor.
Can you tell me who made the motion and second for 829 again?
Dino.
Dino's, of course, yeah. Yeah, and remind me, did you vote on the last, on the last agenda item,
Yeah.
23? Okay, so you were, I couldn't remember the, yeah, 2310, Henry Schottenberg.
Yes.
Well, you were here for the vote.
I was not here for 1, 2.
Thank you.
There you go. Thanks.
Hey, Nathan, don't forget this one.
Oh.
Thank you.
Praise God.
I found a mistake. I found a mistake that I made.
I gotta stop the recording.